Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Letter. Ted Padilla had built his life on precision. As a financial forensic analyst who'd helped the FBI dismantle 3 major Ponzi schemes, he understood that chaos always left patterns. You just had to know where to look. At 36, he traded the adrenaline of federal investigations for the quieter rhythm of private consulting, wanting more time with his daughter, Emma. His wife, Catherine, had died from an aneurysm when Emma was only 3, a sudden violence that still haunted Ted's dreams 4 years later. That Tuesday evening, Ted was reviewing case files in his home office, a converted sunroom overlooking their backyard in suburban Philadelphia, when Emma burst through the door, her backpack trailing behind her. "Daddy, a nice lady gave me this at school." Emma's 7-year-old enthusiasm filled the room as she thrust a cream-colored envelope toward him. Ted's analytical mind immediately cataloged anomalies. The envelope was expensive stationery, no postage, his name written in elegant cursive that suggested education and refinement. But the delivery method, handed directly to a child, violated every reasonable protocol. What did this lady look like, sweetheart? Emma scrunched her nose, thinking. She had really pretty red hair, and she smelled like flowers. She said it was very important you read it right away, but I should give it to you when we got home. Ted's chest tightened. Someone had approached his daughter. Someone who knew enough to time their approach carefully, to use a woman to seem less threatening, to specifically instruct Emma to wait until they were home, ensuring Ted couldn't immediately respond. He opened the envelope with steady hands, though his pulse hammered in his ears. "Your daughter isn't safe. Meet me at Pier 9 at midnight. Come alone or you'll never see her again." The words were precise, minimal, threatening. Pier 9 was an abandoned shipping dock on the Delaware River, condemned 3 years ago after a structural fire. Ted had driven past it countless times, a skeletal ruin of rust and decay. Did she say anything else? Ted kept his voice calm, not wanting to frighten Emma. "She said she was an old friend of yours, that you'd be happy to hear from her." Emma was already losing interest, pulling out her homework. "Can I have a snack?" Ted called his brother, Virgil Padilla, a homicide detective with the Philadelphia PD. They'd grown up in North Philly, 2 brothers who'd watched their father drink himself to death, and their mother work 3 jobs. Virgil had chosen the badge. Ted had chosen numbers and patterns. Both had chosen justice, just different paths to it. "I need you to come by. Don't use the sirens," Ted said when Virgil answered. 40 minutes later, Virgil sat in Ted's kitchen, the letter sealed in an evidence bag on the table between them. Emma was upstairs, occupied with her tablet and oblivious to the tension below. "This is professional," Virgil said, studying the paper. "Quality stationery, careful phrasing designed to isolate you and create urgency." The nice lady approach to Emma was calculated, less threatening to a child than a man. "Whoever this is, they've planned this carefully. Run the school security footage," Ted said. Emma said around 2:30, near the pickup area. "Already texted my tech guy." Virgil leaned back, his detective's eyes assessing his brother. "What cases are you working? Anyone who'd want leverage over you?" Ted had considered this during the 40 minutes before Virgil arrived. "I'm reviewing the Montgomery investment case, $340 million fraud. But that's just analysis for the prosecution. I'm not uncovering anything new." "What about old cases? Someone getting out of prison, holding a grudge?" "I've put away embezzlers, not violent criminals. These were white-collar cases." Virgil's phone buzzed. He read the message, his expression darkening. "Got the footage. You're not going to like this." The video, forwarded to Virgil's phone, showed a woman in her late 30s with striking auburn hair, expensive clothes, and sunglasses despite the overcast day. She approached Emma with practiced ease, handed her the envelope, spoke briefly, then walked away. The camera angle never caught her face clearly. She'd known exactly where the blind spots were. "She's done this before," Virgil muttered. "Professional surveillance work, maybe, or law enforcement training." But it was the next part that made Ted's blood freeze. At exactly 9:47 p.m., while Virgil was still at Ted's house, Ted's phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Padilla. A woman's voice, cultured and calm. The same voice, Ted was certain, that had spoken to Emma. I hope you received my letter. I also hope you're not involving the police. But since I can see Detective Virgil Padilla's car in your driveway, I know you are. That's disappointing. Ted's eyes shot to Virgil, who was already moving toward the window. Who are you? Ted demanded. Someone who knows everything about you, Ted. I know your daughter eats strawberry yogurt for breakfast every Tuesday. I know you take the same running route every Saturday morning, 4 miles through Fairmount Park, starting at 7 a.m. I know you still wear your wedding ring, even though Catherine's been gone 4 years. And I know that right now, you're terrified, which is exactly how I want you. What do you want? Midnight. Pier 9. Come alone, or this gets much worse. Your brother can stay with Emma. She'll be safe as long as you cooperate. But Ted, don't try to be clever. Don't try to turn this into one of your investigations. Just come, listen, and if you're smart, everyone walks away intact. The line went dead. Virgil was already on his radio, calling for a patrol car. We'll have units watching the house, unmarked cars. She's watching us right now, Ted interrupted. She saw your car. She knows our next moves. And we changed tactics. Let me go to Pier 9, wired up tactical team in position. And if she's telling the truth, if she has Emma targeted and I don't show. The brothers stared at each other, the weight of impossible choices hanging between them. She said, listen, Ted said slowly, his analytical mind engaging despite the fear. Not do what I say or follow instructions. She wants to talk. This isn't a kidnapping. Not yet. This is recruitment or coercion. For what? That's what I'm going to find out. Chapter 2. Shadows and Secrets. The hours between the phone call and midnight crawled with agonizing slowness. Ted sat with Emma as she fell asleep, reading her favorite book about a girl detective, his voice steady even as his mind raced through scenarios. Virgil had positioned 2 plainclothes officers in unmarked vehicles on their street, with strict orders to maintain distance. Ted knew it wouldn't matter. Whoever this woman was, she was always 3 steps ahead. At 11:15 p.m., Ted left his house through the back door, moving through his neighbor's yard to a prearranged pickup 0.2 blocks away. Virgil had argued for surveillance, for backup, for every tactical advantage. Ted had refused everything except a concealed recording device, a pin-sized unit clipped inside his jacket. If I'm not back by 2 a.m., you know what to do, Ted had told his brother. If you're not back by 1 a.m., I'm coming in with everything I've got, Virgil countered. Now, driving his Honda Accord toward the Delaware River, Ted let his mind work through the puzzle. The woman knew intimate details about his life, not just public records, but behavioral patterns. That required surveillance, probably weeks of it. The expense, the sophistication, the patience. This was an amateur hour. He thought about his cases, searching for connections. The Montgomery investment fraud was his current project, but he was just reviewing documentation for trial. Before that, he'd analyzed the Carrington Medical Supplies overbilling scheme, $89 million in fraudulent Medicare claims. Before that, the Westlake development tax evasion case. All white-collar, all resolved or in prosecution. Unless Ted's mind snagged on something. 3 months ago, he'd been contacted by a lawyer named Devin O'Connor about a potential case. O'Connor represented the estate of Marcus Hunt, a Philadelphia real estate developer who died in a car accident. Hunt's children suspected their stepmother, Marissa Hunt née Donaldson, of manipulating their father's will. They wanted Ted to examine financial records for evidence of undue influence or fraud. Ted had reviewed the preliminary documents, trusts, property transfers, insurance policies. Something had felt off about the timing of certain transactions, all occurring in the 6 months before Marcus Hunt's death. But before Ted could dig deeper, O'Connor had called back, saying the family had decided not to pursue the investigation. The stepmother had reached a settlement with the children. Ted remembered being surprised. The numbers suggested a clear pattern of asset diversion, exactly the kind of case he specialized in. For the family to settle without investigation meant either the evidence was weaker than it appeared, or someone had paid them well to walk away. What if they'd backed off because Marissa Donaldson Hunt was dangerous? Pier 9 emerged from the darkness like a rotting tooth, twisted metal, collapsed sections of dock, the skeleton of a warehouse silhouetted against the river's reflection. Ted parked where instructed, in a gravel lot surrounded by chain-link fence. Sodium lights flickered, creating pools of sickly orange glow. He checked his watch, 11:57 p.m. The air smelled of river water and rust. Ted walked toward the pier, gravel crunching under his shoes. The recording device was active, transmitting to a receiver in his car that would upload to Virgil's secure server. At exactly midnight, a figure emerged from the warehouse shadow. She was striking, auburn hair pulled back, elegant even in dark jeans and a leather jacket. Late 30s, tall, moving with the confidence of someone who controlled every element of her environment. As she stepped into the light, Ted recognized her from the school footage. "Mr. Padilla, thank you for coming." Her voice matched the phone call, cultured, calm, with an accent that suggested private schools and European education. "Who are you?" "Marissa Donaldson." She smiled slightly. "Though I suspect you've already figured that out. You're very good at what you do, Ted. That's why we're here." Ted's analytical mind processed this. She'd used her maiden name, not Hunt. That was deliberate, establishing identity separate from her late husband. "What do you want?" "To hire you, actually." Marissa gestured to a section of dock that looked marginally stable. "Shall we sit? This may take a while." "I'll stand." "Talk." Marissa's smile widened. Direct. "I appreciate that. Here's the situation, Ted. My late husband's children hired you 3 months ago to investigate me. You found some concerning patterns in financial transactions. I know because I've seen your preliminary notes." Ted's mind raced. She'd accessed his files. That required significant hacking capability or inside access to his systems. "Then I never completed the investigation," Ted said carefully, "because I paid the Hunt children $12 million to make the whole thing disappear. But here's the problem. Those concerning patterns you noticed? They're real. I did manipulate Marcus's assets. I did forge his signature on certain documents. I did accelerate his life insurance payout through some creative pharmaceutical assistance." She was confessing to murder. Ted's hand itched to reach for a phone, to call Virgil, to do something. But Marissa's calm demeanor suggested she held more cards than she'd revealed. "Why tell me this?" "Because I need someone with your skills, and I need them to be properly motivated. See, Marcus wasn't my first wealthy husband. He was my fourth. And the patterns you noticed? They exist in 3 previous estates as well. I've accumulated approximately $340 million over 15 years through a combination of marriage, manipulation, and what we might call strategic widowhood." Ted's stomach turned. This woman was a serial killer, confessing casually as if discussing stock portfolios. "The FBI has no evidence," Marissa interrupted. "I've been extraordinarily careful. Different states, different methods, years apart. Marcus's death was ruled accidental. My previous husband's, 1 heart attack, 1 stroke, 1 accidental drowning. All natural or accidental. All investigated and closed. Then why do you need me?" Marissa's expression shifted, something like concern flickering across her face. "Because someone is blackmailing me. Someone who knows what I've done and wants $50 million to stay quiet. And I need you to find out who they are." The audacity was staggering. She wanted Ted to help protect her from consequences while dangling his daughter as leverage. "And if I refuse? Then the anonymous tip I've prepared goes to the FBI, detailing how you've been helping me launder money for the past year. I have documents, email trails, financial transfers, all fabricated, all convincing. Your career ends, you're investigated, possibly prosecuted. And while you're fighting that battle, who's protecting Emma?" The threat was clear, multi-layered, and devastatingly effective. But something in Marissa's delivery fell off to Ted's trained ear. She was confident, yes, but there was an undercurrent of desperation. The blackmail threat had rattled her. "I need time to think," Ted said. "You have 12 hours. Noon tomorrow, I'll call with instructions. And Ted, I know you're recording this. I know your brother has officers watching your house. I know you'll try to find a way out. But understand, I've spent 15 years staying ahead of people smarter than you. This isn't negotiation. This is inevitability. She walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the warehouse. Ted stood frozen for a moment, then walked quickly back to his car. His mind was already working through the problem, finding angles, identifying the patterns beneath Marissa's carefully constructed threat. Because Ted Padilla had lied to her about one thing. He'd never stopped investigating Marissa Donaldson. After O'Connor had called off the initial case, Ted's curiosity had been too sharp to ignore. He'd spent the last 3 months building a shadow investigation, documenting everything. He hadn't had enough evidence to take to authorities, but he'd had enough to know Marissa was dangerous. Now she just handed him something far more valuable than evidence. She'd shown him her weakness. Someone was blackmailing her, someone who knew her secrets, which meant someone else had evidence, had leverage, had vulnerability, and Ted was going to find them. Chapter 3, The Deeper Game. Ted drove for 20 minutes, ensuring no tail, before pulling into an all-night diner in South Philly. Virgil was already there, occupying a corner booth, 3 cups of coffee already drained. The recording device had transmitted everything. Jesus Christ, Ted. Virgil's face was pale. She confessed to 4 murders. And we can't use it. Ted slid into the booth. Any lawyer will argue entrapment, coercion. She knew I was recording. She said so. This is her controlling the narrative. Then we take it to the FBI anyway. Let them. And she releases fabricated evidence of my complicity. Virgil, she's thought this through. She has resources, skills, patience. Going direct won't work. Virgil leaned back, studying his brother. You've got a plan. The beginning of one. Ted pulled out his laptop. She said someone is blackmailing her. That's her pressure point. If we find the blackmailer, we find her evidence. We find evidence, we build a real case. And how do we find a ghost blackmailing a woman who successfully killed 4 people? Ted's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up files he'd been compiling for 3 months. We start with what we know. Marissa's pattern is sophisticated. She marries wealthy men, usually older, isolated from family. She systematically diverts assets, then eliminates the husband using methods that appear natural or accidental. But there's always a gap between marriage and death, usually 18 to 24 months. Time to establish legal claim and redirect assets, Virgil noted. Exactly. Now, Marcus Hunt died 7 months ago. Before him, husband number 3 was Gerald Copeland, San Diego real estate mogul. Died 3 years ago from an apparent stroke. Before that, Richard Fleming, Dallas oil executive, drowned while sailing alone 5 years ago. Before him, David Schneider, Chicago commodities trader, heart attack at his desk 8 years ago. Ted pulled up photographs of each man. All successful, all isolated, all died under circumstances that raised no immediate flags. How'd you get all this? After the Hunt family dropped the investigation, I couldn't let it go. I used public records, obituaries, property transfers. I found the pattern. Virgil absorbed this. You've been working this for 3 months without telling me. I had suspicions, not evidence. I wasn't ready to. Bullshit. You didn't tell me because you knew I'd tell you to walk away. Virgil's voice was hard. Ted, this woman has killed 4 people. She's threatening Emma. This isn't a puzzle. This is your life. The brothers stared at each other. Years of shared history crackling between them. They'd survived their father's rage together, their mother's exhaustion, the violence of their neighborhood. They'd learned early that the world was divided into predators and prey, and the only way to survive was to be neither, to be the hunter. I can't walk away, Ted said quietly. She knows too much about Emma, about us. The only way out is through. Virgil's jaw clenched, then he nodded. Then we do this smart. What's the next move? Ted turned the laptop screen toward Virgil. Marissa said the blackmailer knows what she's done, meaning they have evidence. To have evidence of 4 murders across 8 years requires access to her private life, her communications, her movements. That's either law enforcement, private investigation, or someone inside her circle. Lover? Business partner? Marissa doesn't have partners. She has victims. But Ted pulled up another file. Each husband had children from previous marriages. The Hunt kids hired me. What if one of the others did the same? What if someone else investigating Marissa stumbled onto the pattern? That's a lot of ifs. Then let's narrow it down. Ted's fingers flew across the keyboard. Gerald Copeland had one daughter, Cecilia Copeland Harvey, now 32, living in Los Angeles. She's a corporate attorney. Richard Fleming had two sons, both estranged. Elias Fleming, 41, works in Denver as a private investigator. Both men looked at each other. That's our guy, Virgil said. Maybe. David Schneider had no children, but his sister, Pearl Schneider McFadden, contested the will. She lost, but she hired investigators. One of them was a former FBI agent named Guy Barnes. Ted pulled up Barnes's profile, 63, retired from the FBI's white-collar crime division, now running a private firm specializing in asset recovery. Based in Phoenix. We've got two solid possibilities, Ted said. Elias Fleming, who has the skills and the motive. His father's death made Marissa wealthy while he and his brother got nothing. And Guy Barnes, who has FBI training and was already investigating on behalf of Schneider's sister. Could be working together, Virgil suggested. Or competing. Marissa said one blackmailer, but she could be wrong. Virgil checked his watch. 2:47 a.m. So what's the play? We've got 9 hours before she calls. Ted closed his laptop. We go on offense. She expects me to be scared, reactive. Instead, I'm going to do what I do best. Follow the money and find the truth. You give me everything you can on Fleming and Barnes. I'm going to track Marissa's current finances and see if she's already paid any blackmail money. And Emma stays home from school tomorrow. I'll tell her she's sick. You assign someone you trust absolutely to watch the house. Johnny Preston, my old partner, retired last year. He's bored, he's lethal, and he owes me. Good. Ted stood. This woman thinks she's playing me. But she made a mistake, Virgil. She assumed I'd act like a victim. She forgot I'm a hunter too. As Ted drove home through the pre-dawn darkness, his mind was already 3 moves ahead. Marissa Donaldson had killed 4 people and threatened his daughter, but she'd also revealed her greatest fear, exposure. Someone had evidence, leverage, knowledge, and Ted was going to find them, flip them, and use their information to destroy Marissa completely. But what Ted couldn't know, was that Marissa's confession had been carefully calibrated theater. The blackmailer existed, yes, but Marissa had chosen Ted Padilla not because she needed his analytical skills. She'd chosen him because the blackmailer was someone from Ted's own past, someone who knew him intimately, someone who'd already infiltrated his life so deeply that Ted had never noticed. The real game hadn't started at Pier 9. It had started 7 years ago, the day Ted married Catherine. Chapter 4. Parallel Hunts. Ted watched Emma eat breakfast through exhausted eyes, having slept maybe 90 minutes. She'd accepted her sudden illness with 7-year-old logic, delighted to have a day off school. Johnny Preston, a bear of a man with silver hair and the alert eyes of a lifelong cop, sat at their kitchen table working through a crossword puzzle while maintaining perfect awareness of all sight lines to the house. Uncle Johnny's going to stay with you today while I work, Ted explained. You be good for him, okay? Can we watch movies? Emma asked hopefully. Educational movies, Johnny rumbled, winking at her. About dinosaurs eating bad guys. While Emma giggled, Ted's phone buzzed. A text from Virgil. Got everything on Fleming and Barnes. Meet at precinct? My office, 9 a.m., Ted replied. More secure. Ted's office occupied the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse in Old City. Exposed brick, high ceilings, 3 separate computer systems isolated from each other for client confidentiality. He designed it like a bunker, with multiple locks, encrypted servers, and a paranoia born from years handling sensitive financial investigations. Virgil arrived with 2 coffee thermoses and a banker's box of files. Fleming first, he said, spreading documents across Ted's conference table. Elias Fleming, 41, Marine Corps veteran, 2 tours in Iraq. Honorable discharge, worked private security for 3 years, then got his PI license. based in Denver, specializes in missing persons and surveillance. His father, Richard Fleming, died 5 years ago, sailing accident off the San Diego coast. Boat was found drifting. Richard's body recovered 3 days later. Coroner ruled accidental drowning, possibly hit his head during a fall. Ted studied the photographs. Elias was lean, hard-faced, with the stillness of someone who'd seen violence. Marissa married Richard 2 years before his death. What did Elias inherit? Nothing. Richards will left everything to Marissa, estate valued at $73 million. Elias and his brother contested the will, claiming undue influence. Lost. They'd been estranged from their father for years. Richard had remarried after their mother's death, and the sons never accepted it. So Elias's motive for revenge. What about means? Could he have gathered evidence on Marissa? Virgil pulled out another file. Here's where it gets interesting. 6 months after his father's death, Elias's PI firm took on a new partner, Cheryl Charles, former NSA analyst. Signals intelligence, digital forensics. If anyone could hack Marissa's life, it's her. Ted's analytical mind clicked pieces together. Marissa mentioned evidence going back to all 4 husbands. That requires access to old communications, banking records, medical files. Cheryl Charles could do that. There's more. Virgil handed over printouts. Elias's firm has been tracking Marissa. I found surveillance photos purchased through a contact at a Denver data broker, taken over the last 18 months. Marissa in Philadelphia, San Diego, Phoenix. Someone's been following her movements. Ted examined the photos, long-distance shots, clearly professional surveillance. Marissa entering buildings, meeting people, living her life unaware she was being watched. The dedication required for this level of tracking suggested obsession, resources, patience. That's our blackmailer, Ted said. Elias Fleming discovered what Marissa did to his father, partnered with someone who could prove it, and has been building a case. Now he's squeezing her for $50 million. Solid theory. What about Guy Barnes? Virgil opened his second file. Guy Barnes, 63, 30 years with the FBI white-collar crime division. Retired 5 years ago, started a private firm specializing in asset recovery. Basically, he finds hidden money for wealthy clients going through divorces or estate disputes. Pearl Schneider McFadden hired him 8 years ago when her brother David died and left everything to his wife, Marissa. Ted leaned forward. Same pattern. What did Barnes find? Unknown. The case file was sealed as part of a settlement agreement. But Barnes's firm received a payment of $2.3 million from the Schneider estate, way more than standard investigator fees. That's hush money. Pearl paid him to go away. What? Fear, maybe? Or Barnes found enough to scare her, and Marissa paid the settlement. Virgil pulled out financial records. Here's something else. Barnes's firm has received 4 payments in the last 6 months, each for $125,000. Source listed as consulting fees from a shell corporation registered in the Caymans. Ted did the math instantly. $500,000 in 6 months. Blackmail installments. That's what I figured. Barnes discovered the pattern, same as Elias Fleming. But instead of going to authorities, he's bleeding Marissa dry. Ted stood, pacing his office. 2 potential blackmailers, both with means and motive. Elias Fleming, seeking revenge for his father through financial destruction. Guy Barnes, a retired FBI agent leveraging his investigative skills for profit. Could they be working together? Virgil asked. Possible. But Marissa said someone singular. And blackmail is usually a solo operation. Fewer people to split the take, fewer chances for betrayal. Ted turned to his brother. We need to find out which one it is, or if there's a third player we're missing. How? Ted moved to his computer. Marissa's going to call at noon with instructions. That gives us, he checked his watch, 2 hours. I'm going to trace recent financial movements in her accounts. If she's already paid blackmail money, it'll show a pattern. You reach out to your contacts in Denver and Phoenix. See if Fleming or Barnes have made any large deposits recently. Ted, even if we find the blackmailer, what's the end game? Marissa still has you over a barrel. Not if we flip the script. She needs me to find the blackmailer. Once we do, we have leverage. We know who has evidence against her. We can either work with them to build a prosecution case, or we use them to negotiate Marissa's surrender. Virgil looked skeptical. You're assuming the blackmailer wants justice. What if they just want money? Then we make justice more profitable. For the next 90 minutes, Ted dove into financial records he'd been compiling on Marissa. Her accounts were sophisticated, multiple LLCs, offshore holdings, real estate in various names. But Ted's specialty was finding patterns in chaos, and he was very good at his job. At 10:47 a.m., he found it. Virgil, look at this. Ted pulled up bank statements. 3 weeks ago, Marissa transferred $5 million from one of her Delaware LLCs to a cryptocurrency exchange. The crypto was converted and moved through 3 different wallets, then cashed out Pier. He traced the path across his screen. An account registered to a business called Apex Consulting Solutions, based in Denver. Fleming's City, Virgil noted, but not Fleming's company. Let me cross-reference. Ted's fingers flew across the keyboard. Apex Consulting is registered to Cheryl Charles, Fleming's partner. So they're working together. Or she's running the operation and he's just muscle. Ted pulled up more records. Here's another payment 6 weeks ago. $5 million, same route, same destination. That's $10 million in 6 weeks. At that rate, Marissa will hit the $50 million demand in 5 months, Virgil finished. Which means this started about 6 weeks ago. What triggered it? Ted thought back to his timeline. 7 months ago, Marcus Hunt died. 6 months ago, Marissa settled with his children and paid them off. 6 weeks ago, the blackmail started. Something happened between the settlement and the blackmail that made Fleming and Charles act. Virgil's phone buzzed. He read the message, face darkening. My Denver contact just sent me something. Elias Fleming's girlfriend died 2 months ago. Car accident. Hit and run, never solved. Ted and Virgil locked eyes, both understanding simultaneously. Marissa killed her, Ted said. Fleming got too close, so she eliminated someone he cared about as a warning. And instead of backing off, he escalated to blackmail. That's not about money anymore, Virgil said. That's about revenge. At exactly noon, Ted's phone rang. Unknown number. Mr. Padilla, Marissa's cultured voice filled the office. I trust you've had time to consider my offer. I'll help you, Ted said. But I need access to all your financial records, communications, everything. I can't find the blackmailer if you hide information from me. A pause. Then, you're smarter than I expected. You've already been digging, haven't you? Found my recent cryptocurrency transfers. I found $10 million in payments over 6 weeks. You said $50 million total. I need to know what triggered the blackmail. Very well. Marissa's tone shifted, becoming almost conversational. 2 months ago, someone I'd been monitoring became a problem. Elias Fleming. Does that name mean anything to you? Ted's pulse quickened. She was testing him, seeing if he'd already identified Fleming. Richard Fleming's son, Ted said. One of your previous husbands. Excellent. Elias had been investigating me since his father's death. I was aware, but unconcerned. He had suspicions, not proof. Then he partnered with Cheryl Charles, who unfortunately has considerable digital skills. Together, they began compiling evidence. Phone records, financial transactions, even medical data I thought was sealed. 2 months ago, I decided to discourage their investigation. You killed his girlfriend. An accident is such a flexible term. But yes, I arranged her death. A warning that he should let the past remain buried. The casual admission made Ted's stomach turn. And instead, he came after you. With remarkable efficiency. Within a week, I received the first message, $50 million, or he goes to the FBI with everything. He's been extracting payments while assembling his case. Clever, really. He gets rich either way. Why not just pay the full amount? Because payments create patterns, Mr. Padilla. You of all people should know that. Large single transfers attract attention. But here's the real problem. Cheryl Charles is dying. That pulled Ted up short. What? Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. She has perhaps 3 months. And a dying woman is unpredictable. She might decide exposing me is more valuable than money. She might upload everything to the FBI out of spite. She might complicate things. Ted understood now. Marissa didn't just want the blackmail to stop. She wanted the evidence destroyed and the blackmailers dead. She was hiring Ted to find them so she could eliminate them. I won't help you kill people, Ted said flatly. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to locate them. What happens after that? Well, Elias Fleming made his choice when he started this. Now he'll face consequences. And if I refuse, then at 3 p.m. today, Emma's school receives a bomb threat. The school evacuates. In the chaos, Emma disappears. You'll never find her body, Ted. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering if she's alive somewhere, trapped, calling for you. The threat was so specific, so detailed, that Ted knew it wasn't hypothetical. Marissa had planned this contingency. I need 48 hours, Ted said, his voice steady despite the rage coursing through him. You have 24. Tomorrow, noon, you deliver Fleming's location or Emma dies. And Ted, I know you're recording this. I know your brother is with you. I know Johnny Preston is at your house. But you've seen what I'm capable of. I've killed 5 people now and walked away clean every time. Don't let Emma be the 6th. The line went dead. Ted looked at Virgil, who'd heard everything through the speaker. His brother's face was carved from stone, the cop and him warring with the uncle. We have 24 hours to find Fleming, warn him, get the evidence, and build a case against Marissa, Virgil said. Or we grab Emma and run. She'll find us. You heard her. She's been planning this. She has resources we don't understand yet. Then what's the play? Ted turned back to his computer, pulling up everything he had on Elias Fleming and Cheryl Charles. We find him first. We get the evidence. And then we use it to destroy Marissa so completely she can't threaten anyone ever again. But even as he said it, Ted felt the weight of the trap closing around him. Marissa had positioned him perfectly. He had to locate her enemies to save his daughter, but doing so made him complicit in their deaths. Unless he could find a way to turn hunters into allies and victims into weapons. Chapter 5. The Enemy of My Enemy. Cheryl Charles lived in a modest bungalow in Denver's Highlands neighborhood, the kind of place that spoke of comfort rather than wealth. Ted and Virgil had caught a 3 p.m. flight, leaving Johnny Preston with Emma and 2 additional officers Virgil trusted absolutely. The flight had been tense, both men running through scenarios, contingencies, worst cases. Now, standing on Cheryl's porch at 9 p.m. Mountain Time, Ted felt the weight of every decision that had led him here. Virgil stood slightly behind him, hand near his concealed weapon, eyes scanning the street. Ted knocked. The woman who answered was rail-thin, her skin holding the yellow tint of serious illness. But her eyes were sharp, assessing, and her stance suggested someone who'd spent years analyzing threats. Cheryl Charles. Who's asking? Her voice was raspy but firm. Ted Padilla. This is my brother, Virgil. We need to talk about Marissa Donaldson. Cheryl's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. She stepped back, letting them enter. The interior was neat, professional, computer equipment on one desk, medical supplies on another. The living room held the quiet organization of someone who knew their time was limited. I wondered when someone would show up, Cheryl said, settling into a chair with careful movements. Didn't expect it to be the analyst Marissa tried to recruit. How'd you find me? Financial forensics. You've been collecting blackmail payments through Apex Consulting. Ted sat across from her, Virgil remaining standing by the door. Where's Elias Fleming? Not here. He's handling other aspects of our project. Cheryl studied Ted with the intensity of someone reading code. Marissa sent you to find us, didn't she? Probably threatened your daughter. That's her pattern. Identify the pressure point. Apply force until the target breaks. She gave me 24 hours to deliver Fleming's location. And you flew to Denver instead of calling her with my address. Interesting. So you're either planning to get the evidence yourself and cut your own deal, or you're here to warn us. Which is it? Ted leaned forward. I know what Marissa is. I know she's killed 4 husbands, probably Fleming's girlfriend, and God knows who else. I know you and Elias have been blackmailing her while building a case. And I know you're dying, which means your timeline is compressed and your options are limited. So here's what I'm proposing. You give me everything you have on Marissa, I build it into a prosecution-ready case, and we put her away before she kills anyone else, including my daughter, including Elias Fleming. Cheryl laughed, a sound that dissolved into coughing. When she recovered, her expression was sad. You really believe that would work? Ted, I spent 12 years with the NSA. I've seen what people like Marissa can do. She has lawyers, offshore assets, contingencies for every scenario. Even with evidence, she'll tie up prosecution for years while she eliminates everyone who threatens her. Then what's your plan? Keep bleeding her for money until you die, and she kills Fleming anyway. My plan, Cheryl said quietly, is already in motion. And it's not about money. She stood, moving to her computer desk. Let me show you something. The screen displayed a complex web of documents, photos, financial records, medical files. 8 years of investigation compressed into a devastating digital archive. David Schneider, Marissa's first husband. Heart attack at his desk. Except his talk screen showed traces of digoxin, a heart medication he'd never been prescribed. The levels were borderline, just enough to trigger arrhythmia in someone with underlying conditions. But I found Marissa's pharmacy records. She'd filled a digoxin prescription 3 months before David's death, claiming it was for her mother. Her mother had been dead for 2 years. Cheryl clicked to the next file. Richard Fleming, Elias's father, drowned while sailing alone. Except I traced Marissa's location data from her phone. She was on that boat. She disabled Richard's tracking device and staged the scene. I have her phone pinging off cell towers near the marina, then going dark for 4 hours, exactly the window when Richard died. More files appeared. Gerald Copeland. Stroke. Except Marissa had been researching stroke-inducing drugs for weeks before, accessing dark web pharmacology forums. I recovered her browsing history from backups. And Marcus Hunt. Virgil asked. Car accident. Brakes failed. I have receipts showing Marissa took his car to a mechanic the day before, a mechanic who doesn't exist at that address. She sabotaged the brakes herself. Ted stared at the evidence. It was devastating, comprehensive, exactly what any prosecutor would need. Why haven't you gone to the FBI? Because I wanted her to suffer first. Cheryl's voice hardened. She killed Elias's father. She killed Lauren, Elias's girlfriend, a woman who'd never harmed anyone. And she's walked away from all of it, collecting millions, living in luxury. Death will be too kind. Prison will be too kind. I want her destroyed. The blackmail, Ted realized. It's not about the money. It's about making her feel haunted, afraid, powerless. Exactly. Every payment she makes is an admission of guilt. Every transaction creates a pattern. And when she finally breaks, when she makes a mistake trying to eliminate us, we'll have her on attempted murder too. You're using yourselves as bait, Virgil said. We're dying anyway. Cheryl gestured to her medical equipment. I have maybe 10 weeks. Elias has nothing left to lose. Lauren was his entire world. So yes, we're bait. And when Marissa comes for us, we'll be ready. Ted's mind raced through the implications. Where's Fleming now? Philadelphia. He's been there for 3 days, watching Marissa, waiting for her to make a move against you. The revelation hit Ted like a physical blow. He's been watching my house, my daughter. He's been protecting them. When Marissa sent that woman to approach Emma at school, Elias was there. He photographed everything. When she made her surveillance sweep of your street, Elias documented her vehicle, her movements, her methods. Cheryl pulled up more files. Photos of Marissa near Ted's house, near Emma's school, near his office. Elias Fleming had been tracking Marissa, tracking Ted. So we're all pieces in her game, Ted said bitterly. No. Cheryl's voice was firm. We're setting the board for endgame. Marissa thinks she controls the situation. She doesn't realize we've been documenting everything. Every threat she makes to you is recorded. Every surveillance pass, every intimidation tactic. When this goes to prosecution, we won't just have evidence of murder. We'll have evidence of witness intimidation, stalking, conspiracy. We'll bury her. If we live that long, Virgil pointed out. That's where you come in. Cheryl fixed Ted with an intense stare. Marissa expects you to deliver Elias's location tomorrow at noon. Instead, you're going to set up a meeting. Tell her you found us. Tell her we're willing to negotiate. Then, when she comes for us, we'll have everything we need. Attempted murder on top of everything else. Ted shook his head. You're talking about a trap that puts everyone at risk. Emma, Elias, Yumi, your daughter is already at risk. She'll stay at risk until Marissa is in custody. This is the only way. Ted looked at Virgil, who gave a slight nod. His brother understood. Sometimes the only way through a trap was to spring it on your own terms. I need to talk to Fleming, Ted said. Face to face. If we're doing this, everyone needs to be on the same page. Cheryl made a call. 20 minutes later, Ted's phone buzzed with an address, a warehouse in Denver's industrial district. When Ted and Virgil arrived, Elias Fleming was waiting in the shadows. He was exactly as his photos suggested, lean, hard, with the stillness of a predator. But his eyes held something else, a grief so profound it had transformed into cold purpose. You're the analyst, Elias said. The one she's using to find me. I'm the father she's threatening to get to you, Ted corrected. And I'm here to propose we stop being her victims and start being her nightmare. Elias studied him for a long moment. Cheryl told you the plan. She told me you're using yourself as bait for a woman who's killed 5 people. That's not a plan. That's suicide. I died the day Marissa killed Lauren. Elias's voice was flat, emotionless. What's left is just momentum. I'm going to see her pay for what she's done, even if it kills me. It doesn't have to, Virgil interjected. We're cops, investigators, trained for this. Let us set up a proper operation, surveillance, tactical support, controlled environment. No cops. Marissa has connections in law enforcement. She's paid off people before. The moment you bring in official channels, she'll know. Then we do it unofficial, Ted said. Virgil's people, my resources, your evidence. We set the trap, but we do it smart. We make sure everyone walks away except Marissa. Elias was quiet for a long time. Finally, what did you have in mind? Ted outlined his plan. It was risky, required perfect timing, and depended on Marissa acting exactly as predicted. But it had one crucial advantage. It turned her own tactics against her. She wants a location where she can eliminate threats quietly, Ted explained. So we give her one. But we control every variable. We document everything. And when she makes her move, we have her. Where? Elias asked. Ted smiled grimly. Pier 9, where his whole thing started. Chapter 6, Setting the Board. The next 12 hours were controlled chaos of preparation. Ted flew back to Philadelphia while Elias and Cheryl drove through the night. Cheryl's health was deteriorating, but she insisted on being there for the endgame. Virgil coordinated with Johnny Preston and 2 other retired cops he trusted absolutely, men who'd take bullets before breaking confidence. At 11:45 a.m., Ted sat in his office, phone ready, everything in position. Emma was secure at a safe house, a friend's cabin in the Poconos with Preston standing guard. Virgil had 4 surveillance positions around Pier 9, each manned by people who owed him loyalty beyond any amount Marissa could pay. At exactly noon, Ted called Marissa. I found them, he said without preamble. Elias Fleming and Cheryl Charles. They're in Denver, but they're willing to negotiate. They want to meet. How convenient. Marissa's voice dripped skepticism. After all this time, they suddenly want to talk. Cheryl's dying. Pancreatic cancer. She has weeks left, and she doesn't want to spend them running. Fleming's willing to settle because without her, he can't maintain the pressure. They want $10 million for the evidence and their silence. Final payment. A pause. Ted could almost hear Marissa's analytical mind working through the scenario, testing for deception. Why would I trust them? Or you? Because I verified the evidence. It's real, it's comprehensive, and if they upload it to the FBI, you're finished. But they're also realistic. $10 million for Cheryl's last days and Fleming's fresh start is better than prison or death. They want out, and you want your daughter safe. I want this nightmare over. You get the evidence, they get paid, I walk away. Everyone wins. Another pause. Ted waited, letting the silence work. Marissa was a predator, but even predators could be baited with the right lure. Where and when? Marissa finally asked. Pier 9. Midnight tonight. Same place this started. Fleming chose it. Says it's isolated enough for everyone's safety. He and Cheryl will bring the evidence. You bring payment verification. Once you confirm the evidence is destroyed, you transfer the money. I'll need to verify the evidence is legitimate before any transfer. They're bringing a laptop with everything. You can review it on site. And you? I'll be there to facilitate. Then I'm done. You never contact me or my family again. Ted could hear Marissa's breathing, the calculation behind every second of silence. Midnight, she finally said. And Ted, if this is a trap, Emma dies. I have people positioned who'll act on my signal. The only thing keeping your daughter alive is my continued freedom. I understand. Do you? I wonder. You're smart, Ted. Probably smart enough to think you can outmaneuver me. But I've survived this long because I'm always 3 steps ahead. Whatever you're planning, I've already accounted for it. The line went dead. Ted immediately called Virgil. She took the bait. Midnight at Pier 9. All teams are in position. We've got audio-video coverage of the entire site. The moment she makes a move, we've got her. She said she has people positioned to hurt Emma if this goes wrong. Johnny's got your daughter in a cabin with no digital footprint. Marissa's good, but she's not magic. Emma's safe. Ted wanted to believe that, but Marissa's confidence gnawed at him. She'd agreed too easily, suspicion giving way to acceptance too quickly. Either she genuinely believed the scenario, or she was running her own counter-operation. At 11 p.m., Ted arrived at Pier 9. The November air was sharp with cold, the Delaware River a black mirror reflecting warehouse lights. Virgil had positioned his people in shipping containers, on warehouse rooftops, in vehicles with darkened windows. Every angle covered. Elias Fleming was already there, standing the same spot where Marissa had confronted Ted 3 days ago. He wore a tactical vest under his jacket, and his eyes held the flat calm of someone ready for violence. Cheryl's in the van, Elias said, gesturing to a vehicle parked 50 yards away. She wanted to be here, but her strength's fading fast. She's monitoring everything remotely. The evidence? Elias held up a laptop. Everything. 8 years of investigation. Cheryl encrypted it with a dead man switch. If she doesn't enter a code every 24 hours, it uploads automatically to the FBI, the press, and every major law enforcement agency. Will Marissa know that? We're going to tell her. It's her incentive to keep us alive. Ted checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. She'll be here soon. Remember the plan. Let her review the evidence. Let her believe she's in control. The moment she moves to eliminate either of you, Virgil's people move in. And if she doesn't make a move, if she just takes the evidence and leaves, she won't. She can't. Her entire psychology is built on control and elimination. She won't leave threats alive. At 11:58 p.m., a black Mercedes pulled into the gravel lot. Marissa emerged, elegant even in the industrial decay, moving with the confidence of someone who owned every space they entered. She approached slowly, eyes scanning for threats, for deviations from expectation. Ted stepped forward, positioning himself between Marissa and Fleming. Ms. Donaldson, as promised. Marissa's gaze moved past Ted to Fleming. The military man. I've heard about you. You've been quite persistent. You murder my father, Fleming said flatly. And Lauren. Persistence seems appropriate. Lauren was an unfortunate necessity. She would have complicated things. Marissa's casual tone was monstrous. But you're here to negotiate, not reminisce. Where's Cheryl Charles? Nearby. Too sick to stand for long, but monitoring everything. Fleming held up the laptop. All the evidence. Financial records, phone data, medical files, surveillance footage. Everything you've done, documented and verified. Show me. Fleming opened the laptop, turning the screen toward Marissa. Ted watched her face as she scrolled through files, her expression unreadable. She took her time, examining documents with the same analytical precision Ted employed in his own work. After 15 minutes, she looked up. This is comprehensive, almost impressive. But there's a problem. What's that? Ted asked. You're all assuming I came here to negotiate. Marissa smiled. I came here to tie up loose ends. She raised her hand, and suddenly the night exploded with light and sound. Floodlights ignited from multiple angles, and figures emerged from the shadows. Not Virgil's people, but others. 6 of them, moving with military precision, weapons drawn. Did you really think I wouldn't prepare? Marissa's voice cut through the chaos. I've known about your brother's surveillance since he positioned his people this afternoon. I've known about Cheryl's van, about Fleming's vest, about every element of your little trap. Ted's mind raced, trying to understand how she'd compromised their operation. Then he saw it. One of Marissa's people wore a police tactical vest. She'd infiltrated Virgil's team. Officer Raphael Lynch, Marissa said, following Ted's gaze. He's been on my payroll for 2 years. When your brother started making calls, Lynch made sure I knew everything. Ted's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Emma says hello. I told you I had people positioned. The text included a photo. Emma, asleep in what looked like a moving vehicle. Not the Poconos cabin. Not safe with Preston. Johnny Preston is dead. Marissa continued conversationally. Killed 40 minutes ago when my people took your daughter. Your brother's tactical team is currently being detained by Lynch and his partners on suspicion of illegal surveillance. And you 3 are about to have a tragic accident. She'd won. Completely, devastatingly. She'd anticipated every move, countered every strategy, and now she held every advantage. But then Elias Fleming laughed. It was a sound without humor, just cold recognition. You missed something, Marissa. Something crucial. I doubt that. Cheryl's dead. Marissa's expression flickered. What? She died 20 minutes ago in the van. Peacefully, relatively speaking. And when she died, she didn't enter the code. Marissa's face went pale as understanding hit. The dead man's switch. Already triggered. Everything, every file, every document, every piece of evidence is uploading right now to the FBI, the Philadelphia Police Department, and 4 major news organizations. In about, Fleming checked his watch. 6 minutes, your entire life becomes public record. You're bluffing. Fleming turned the laptop screen toward her. The upload progress bar was at 63%. Marissa moved fast, grabbing for the laptop, but Fleming had anticipated it. He threw the device into the Delaware River, where it sank immediately. Doesn't matter, he said. It's all in the cloud. Encrypted, redundant, unstoppable. You lose. For the first time, Ted saw Marissa's composure crack. Her certainty had been absolute, but Cheryl's final act had shattered it. The evidence was beyond her reach, spreading through systems she couldn't control. Shoot them, Marissa ordered her people. All of them. Now. But before anyone could move, new lights flooded the pier. Actual police vehicles, federal vehicles, converging from multiple directions. Not Virgil's small team, but a full tactical response. And at the front was someone Ted recognized, Devin O'Connor, the lawyer who'd originally contacted him about the Hunt case. Except now he was flanked by FBI agents, and his demeanor had shifted from attorney to federal officer. Marissa Donaldson, O'Connor called out, megaphone in hand. FBI, you're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and kidnapping. Drop any weapons and get on the ground. Marissa's people hesitated, calculating odds. Lynch, the corrupt cop, was already running. The others followed, scattering into the warehouse ruins. Marissa stood frozen, watching her carefully constructed empire collapse in real time. Ow, she whispered. We've been investigating you for 9 months, O'Connor said, approaching with agents flanking him. Since Gerald Copeland's daughter hired us. Everything you did to Ted, to Emma, to Fleming, we watched it all. You were so focused on controlling the board that you didn't realize you were the piece being moved. Ted's mind reeled. The lawyer consultation 3 months ago was me establishing contact under false pretenses. We needed someone with your analytical skills to help build the financial case. When you kept investigating after the Hunt family settled, we knew you were the right person to bring into the operation. And Cheryl's evidence. Real, and now in FBI custody. She worked with us from the beginning. Her terminal diagnosis made her the perfect asset. Nothing to lose, everything to gain by seeing justice done. Marissa looked at Fleming. You were FBI? No. Fleming's voice was hollow. I was exactly who I said I was. A man whose father and girlfriend you murdered. The FBI found me 6 months ago, showed me they were building a case. I agreed to help. So did Cheryl. We wanted you to suffer, and now you will. As agents moved in to arrest Marissa, O'Connor approached Ted. Your daughter is safe. She was never in danger. We had our own protection detail on her. The photo was fabricated to maintain Marissa's belief in her own control. Johnny Preston is alive and fine. Ted's legs nearly gave out from relief. Virgil, coordinating the arrests of Lynch and Marissa's other people. He's known about the FBI operation for 3 weeks. We needed you genuinely scared to sell the deception to Marissa. It had all been theater. Ted, Emma, Fleming, even Cheryl's death. All pieces in a federal operation designed to make Marissa feel so secure in her control that she'd expose herself completely. Why not just tell me? Ted asked. Because Marissa is brilliant at reading people. If you'd known this was an FBI op, you might have acted differently. We needed your fear, your desperation, your authentic reactions to make her believe she was winning. Ted watched as Marissa was handcuffed, her composure completely shattered. 8 years of murder, manipulation, and predation ending in a gravel parking lot by the Delaware River. She killed 5 people, Ted said quietly. She was going to kill more. And now she'll die in prison, O'Connor replied. Sometimes justice takes time, but it comes. Chapter 7, The Reckoning. The interrogation room at the FBI's Philadelphia field office was deliberately uncomfortable. Harsh lighting, metal furniture, air conditioning set slightly too cold. Marissa Donaldson sat with perfect posture despite 18 hours in custody, her expensive clothes rumpled, but her composure returning by degrees. She'd refused a lawyer, a decision that baffled her interrogators but suggested she still believed she could talk her way out. Ted watched through one-way glass as Special Agent Devin O'Connor. His actual title, not the lawyer fiction, laid out the evidence methodically. Financial records showing the systematic asset diversion from 4 husbands. Phone data placing Marissa at crime scenes when she claimed to be elsewhere. Medical records revealing pharmacy purchases for drugs her victims were never prescribed. Surveillance footage from Elias Fleming's months of tracking her. And most damning, the recording of Marissa confessing to Ted at Pier 9, threatening Emma, detailing her murders with casual precision. It's remarkable, O'Connor said, his voice calm through the speaker. You killed 5 people and truly believed you'd never face consequences. What made you so confident? Marissa smiled slightly. Because I'm smarter than the people investigating me. Usually. Not this time. No. This time you used a dying woman and a grieving man as bait, manipulated a civilian analyst, and fabricated evidence to entrap me. Your case is built on lies. Our case is built on your actions. Everything else was just creating an environment where you'd reveal your true nature. And you did, beautifully. 8 minutes of confession at Pier 9, all recorded, all admissible. Entrapment doesn't apply to someone who committed the crimes freely and was simply given opportunity to discuss them. You weren't coerced into murdering David Schneider 8 years ago, Marissa. You chose that, and 3 others after him. For the first time, something flickered in Marissa's eyes. Not remorse, calculation. I want a deal. No deals. You're facing 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of voluntary manslaughter, conspiracy, witness intimidation, kidnapping, and about a dozen other charges. Pennsylvania has the death penalty. Then you'll spend years in court while I appeal, exhaust every resource, and maybe get a conviction decades from now when I'm already old. Marissa leaned forward. Or I give you 3 other women doing exactly what I did, and you get multiple prosecutions instead of just 1. O'Connor's expression didn't change. Explain. I'm not unique. There's a network. Women who marry wealthy, isolated men, systematically divert assets, then eliminate the husbands using methods that appear natural or accidental. We don't know each other officially, but we share information through encrypted channels. Methods, targets, techniques. I give you their identities, their patterns, their next targets, and you get a task force's worth of cases. Ted, watching through the glass, felt his stomach turn. Marissa was describing a conspiracy of serial killers, an organized system of murder for profit operating across state lines. How many? O'Connor asked. That I know of? 5, including me. But I suspect there are more. We're careful, professional, and very good at what we do. We're good, she corrected with a bitter smile. Before you caught me, O'Connor stood. I'll consult with the U.S. attorney. But Marissa, even if we make a deal, you're never walking free. Best case scenario, you die in prison instead of in an execution chamber. I know, but I'd rather go down having destroyed the others. Professional courtesy ends when my freedom does. As O'Connor left the interrogation room, Ted met him in the hallway. Is she telling the truth? About a network? Probably. We've seen patterns in similar cases across the country. Wealthy widowers dying under suspicious but unprovable circumstances, new wives disappearing with fortunes. We've suspected organization but never had proof. So you'll give her a deal? We'll discuss it. But Ted, even if she helps us catch others, Marissa Donaldson is never leaving federal custody. She's a serial killer who showed zero remorse and would kill again if given opportunity. Ted nodded, exhausted. He'd barely slept in 4 days, running on adrenaline and fear. Now that Emma was safe, now that Marissa was caught, his body was crashing. Go home, O'Connor said gently. Your daughter needs you. Virgil's waiting downstairs to drive you. Ted found his brother in the parking garage, leaning against his unmarked car. They embraced silently, the kind of hug that communicated everything words couldn't. Emma's at your house, Virgil said, asking for pancakes and 1,000 questions about where you've been. Preston, fine. Pissed that we used him as a decoy without full disclosure, but he understands. The fake attack, the fake kidnapping, all staged to maintain operational security. Ted climbed into the passenger seat, letting Virgil drive. The Philadelphia streets passed in a blur of streetlights and early morning traffic. Did we do the right thing? Ted asked quietly. Letting the FBI use us, letting them manipulate everything. We caught a serial killer who would have kept killing. We protected Emma. We got justice for Fleming's father and girlfriend, for Copeland and Schneider, and all of them. Virgil glanced at his brother. Yeah, Ted, we did the right thing. Chapter 8, Rebuilding. 3 months later, Ted sat at his office reviewing financial statements for a corporate embezzlement case. The kind of routine work that felt grounding after the chaos of Marissa Donaldson. The FBI had indeed made a deal. Marissa had provided information on 4 other women operating similar schemes, leading to arrests in California, Texas, Florida, and Illinois. The case had become a federal task force, with O'Connor leading the investigation. Marissa herself had pleaded guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder. Prosecutors dropped the first-degree charges as part of the deal, receiving 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. She was currently in FCI Hazleton, a high-security federal prison in West Virginia, where she would remain until she died. Elias Fleming had testified at her trial, giving a victim impact statement that reduced several jurors to tears. He'd spoken about his father, about Lauren, about the whole Marissa's violence had torn through his life. Afterward, he'd returned to Denver, where he'd scattered Cheryl Charles's ashes in the mountain she'd loved. Ted had attended Cheryl's memorial service, a small gathering of NSA colleagues, friends, and Fleming's quiet presence. Cheryl had left her entire estate to a foundation supporting pancreatic cancer research, a final act of purpose from a woman who'd spent her last months ensuring a killer faced justice. Emma was in therapy, processing the fear and confusion of those days when the FBI had secretly protected her. She didn't fully understand what had happened. Ted had framed it as Daddy helping the police catch a bad person, but she was resilient, already bouncing back with 7-year-old adaptability. Ted's phone rang. Virgil, turn on the news. Channel 6. Ted pulled up the live stream on his computer. The press conference showed the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania announcing the indictment of Raphael Lynch and 2 other Philadelphia police officers for corruption, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. Lynch had been on Marissa's payroll for 2 years, compromising investigations and providing intelligence about law enforcement activities. They're cleaning house, Virgil said. Internal Affairs has been reviewing Lynch's cases for months. 37 convictions are being overturned because of his corruption. It's a goddamn disaster. How deep does it go? Deeper than we thought. Lynch had connections to 3 other cases similar to Marissa's. Wealthy men dying suspiciously, investigations stalled or redirected. We think he was providing protection to multiple operators. Jesus. Yeah, it's going to take years to unravel. But Ted, we started this. Our case against Marissa exposed Lynch, which exposed the corruption network. We did something important. After hanging up, Ted sat quietly processing. He'd stumbled into Marissa Donaldson's world, expecting a simple fraud case, and instead uncovered a conspiracy of murder that had tentacles reaching through law enforcement, across state lines, in a systems designed to protect people. But they'd won. Marissa was in prison. Her network was exposed. Emma was safe. A knock on his office door. Johnny Preston stood there, massive and calm, holding a bag of bagels. Figured you'd forget to eat lunch again, Preston rumbled, entering without invitation. You okay? Yeah, just thinking about everything. Preston settled into a chair, the furniture creaking under his weight. You know what I learned in 30 years of police work? Evil doesn't usually look like evil. It looks like a nice lady handing a letter to a kid. It looks like educated, elegant people who do monstrous things behind closed doors. You can't spot it from the outside. You have to dig. That's depressing. That's reality. But here's the other thing I learned. Good people who dig long enough, who stay stubborn enough, eventually find the truth. You did that, Ted. You didn't know you were being used by the FBI, but you kept digging anyway because you knew something was wrong. That instinct, that stubbornness, that's what catches people like Marissa. Ted smiled slightly. Stubborn runs in the family. Damn right it does. That evening, Ted picked up Emma from school, listening to her chatter about a science project on volcanoes. She was happy, healthy, already planning her weekend sleepover with friends. The nightmare had passed, leaving only shadows she was too young to fully understand. They stopped for ice cream, strawberry for Emma, coffee for Ted, and sat in the park watching other families play. The November air was cold, but the sun was bright, and for the first time in months, Ted felt genuinely peaceful. Daddy, Emma asked through a mouthful of ice cream. Are the bad people gone? The bad people who wanted to hurt us are gone, sweetheart. They're in jail. Forever. Forever. Emma considered this seriously. Good. I like forever for bad people. Ted pulled her close, breathing in the scent of strawberry ice cream and children's shampoo. He'd come so close to losing this, these moments, this person, this life. Marissa had held them all hostage, and only through luck, skill, and the FBI's intricate planning had they survived. But they had survived, and Marissa hadn't. That night, after Emma was asleep, Ted sat at his computer and typed an email to Elias Fleming. Elias, I've been thinking about what Cheryl said, that she wanted Marissa to suffer, not just pay. Watching the trial, seeing Marissa's face as she realized her entire world was collapsing, I understood what Cheryl meant. Death would have been too quick. Prison is where Marissa will truly suffer. Decades of powerlessness, control stripped away, surrounded by the consequences of her actions. Cheryl got her wish. Your father, Lauren, all of them, they got justice. I hope that brings you some peace. If you're ever in Philadelphia, Emma and I would like to meet you properly. Not as survivors of Marissa's manipulation, but as people who fought back and won. Ted. The response came 3 hours later. Ted, peace is probably too strong a word, but closure maybe. Cheryl believed that justice was its own form of beauty, perfect, balanced, inevitable. Watching Marissa's sentence to life felt like the universe finally catching up to her. I'll take you up on that visit. I'd like to meet Emma. Cheryl would have wanted me to remember that we didn't just fight a monster, we protected people. That matters. Elias. Chapter 9. Justice Served. 1 year after Marissa Donaldson's arrest, Ted stood in the Philadelphia courthouse listening to the final sentencing in the corruption case against Raphael Lynch. The disgraced police officer, who'd provided protection and intelligence to Marissa and at least 3 other criminals, received 18 years in federal prison. His two accomplices received similar sentences. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom. You betrayed the badge, the public trust, and the very concept of justice. Your corruption allowed murderers to operate freely, led to innocent people being convicted, and undermined faith in law enforcement. The sentence reflects the severity of those betrayals. Lynch showed no emotion as he was led away in handcuffs. But Ted felt something shift inside him, a final piece of the puzzle settling into place. The corruption that had enabled Marissa's crimes was being systematically rooted out and destroyed. In the hallway afterward, Ted met with Devin O'Connor and the lead prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Gloria Dunlap. Dunlap had led the Donaldson prosecution with ruthless efficiency, and she'd been equally effective in dismantling the corruption network. This is the last of them, Dunlap said, satisfaction clear in her voice. Lynch, his accomplices, and the infrastructure they built, all gone. The cases they corrupted are being reviewed, wrongful convictions overturned, investigations reopened. What about the other women Marissa identified? Ted asked. O'Connor pulled out his phone, showing a news article. Antonia Caldwell, the California operator, pleaded guilty last month. Life without parole. Mercedes Rivera in Texas is fighting the charges, but we have solid evidence. The Florida case is complicated by jurisdictional issues, but we'll get there. And the Illinois investigation is ongoing. That one's the most sophisticated. The woman there, Laurel Hayes, has been operating for nearly 20 years. 20 years of murder, Ted said quietly. 20 years we're ending, O'Connor corrected. Because you didn't let go when Marissa tried to scare you off. Because Cheryl Charles and Elias Fleming turned grief into purpose. Because Virgil and his people risked their careers to help. Justice isn't fast, Ted, but it's coming for all of them. That evening, Ted hosted a small gathering at his house. Virgil and his wife, Johnny Preston, Elias Fleming, who'd flown in from Denver, and a few close friends. Emma played hostess with 7-year-old enthusiasm, offering drinks and cookies to everyone. She'd taken a particular liking to Elias, who had an unexpected gift for talking to children. Uncle Elias says he catches bad people too, Emma announced proudly. Just like you and Uncle Virgil. That's right, Elias said, smiling at her. Your dad's really good at it. As the evening wore on, and Emma eventually fell asleep on the couch, the adults settled in a quieter conversation. Preston told war stories from his police career. Virgil's wife shared updates about their upcoming vacation. The mood was light, celebratory. But later, when most guests had left, Ted and Elias stood on the back porch looking at the Philadelphia skyline. Cheryl would have liked this, Elias said. Seeing everyone together, safe. She always said the best revenge was living well while the bad people rotted in cells. She was right. She usually was. Elias was quiet for a moment. I'm selling my business. Moving to Montana. There's too many ghosts in Denver. Starting over? Trying to. Lauren's been gone for over a year now, but some days it feels like yesterday. I need distance, new scenery, work that doesn't involve chasing killers. What will you do? Conservation work? Maybe. Something outdoors, away from people and their cruelties. Cheryl left me some money. She had no family. Put me in her will. Said I should use it to find peace. Ted understood that impulse. After Catherine's death, he'd considered leaving Philadelphia, running from the memories. But Emma had anchored him, given him purpose beyond his own grief. Peace is worth finding, Ted said. But if you ever need anything, investigation, resources, just someone who understands, call me. We're connected now. You, me, Virgil. What we went through, it bonds people. Elias extended his hand. Thanks, Ted, for not giving up, for being strong enough to fight, even when your daughter was threatened. Not everyone would have done that. They shook hands, then embraced briefly. When Elias left an hour later, Ted watched his taillights disappear into Philadelphia traffic and felt the chapter closing. The next morning, Ted took Emma to the cemetery where Catherine was buried. They did this occasionally. Emma was too young to have real memories of her mother, but Ted kept Catherine's presence alive through stories and visits. Mommy would be proud of you, Emma said seriously, placing flowers on the grave. She'd insisted on picking them out herself. Daisies, Catherine's favorite. She'd be proud of you too, sweetheart. You're brave and smart and kind. Did Mommy catch bad people like you do? Ted smiled. Catherine had been a social worker, fighting different battles, but with the same commitment to justice. In her own way, yes. She helped people who couldn't help themselves. I'm going to do that too when I grow up. I believe you will. On the drive home, Ted's phone rang. O'Connor, Marissa wants to talk to you, the agent said without preamble. She's authorized you as a visitor. I told her you'd probably refuse, but she was insistent. Ted's first instinct was to say no. He had no desire to see Marissa, to give her any satisfaction of his attention. But curiosity gnawed at him. What could she possibly want to say? I'll think about it, Ted said. 3 days later, he drove to FCI Hazleton. The high-security federal prison was a fortress of concrete and razor wire, housing some of the most dangerous criminals in the federal system. Marissa Donaldson, serial killer and manipulator, was just one more predator caged among predators. The visiting room was sterile, monitored, designed to prevent any privacy or intimacy. Marissa entered in prison khakis, her elegant clothes replaced by institutional uniformity. She'd aged in the years since her arrest, lines around her eyes, gray streaking her auburn hair. Prison was devouring her slowly. She sat across from Ted, separated by a table and the implicit threat of guards positioned around the room. Thank you for coming, Marissa said. Her voice was the same, cultured, calm, but something fundamental had changed. The absolute confidence was gone, replaced by a weariness that suggested she'd finally accepted her fate. What do you want, Marissa? To apologize. I know it's meaningless, that it doesn't undo what I did or fix the damage I caused. But I wanted to say it anyway. I'm sorry for threatening Emma. I'm sorry for involving you in my nightmare. You deserved none of it. Ted studied her, looking for manipulation for an angle. But he saw only exhaustion and something that might have been genuine remorse. Why, he asked. Why did you do any of it? The money? The thrill? Marissa was quiet for a long time. Control. I grew up powerless. Abusive father, weak mother, no agency over my own life. When I discovered I could manipulate men, take their resources, eliminate them when convenient, it felt like justice. Like balancing the scales. You murdered 5 people. I know, and I'll die here paying for it. But Ted, I want you to know something. When the FBI closed in, when I realized I'd lost, part of me felt relieved. I've been running for 15 years, always looking over my shoulder, always calculating. The weight of it was crushing. Prison is terrible, but at least it's honest. I know what I am now. I know what I deserve. Ted stood. I hope you find whatever peace you're looking for. But you'll find it in here, serving your sentence. You don't get redemption, Marissa. You get consequences. I know. That's enough. As Ted walked out of the prison, through multiple security checkpoints and back into the Pennsylvania sunlight, he felt the final weight lift. Marissa Donaldson was no longer his problem, his threat, his nightmare. She was the Bureau of Prisons' problem, contained and neutralized. He drove home, where Emma was waiting with pictures she'd drawn at school. They made dinner together, spaghetti with too much sauce, and watched a movie about talking animals. Normal, beautiful, safe. That night, tucking Emma into bed, she asked, Daddy, is our adventure over? What adventure, sweetheart? The one with the bad lady. Is it finished? Ted thought about everything. The letter at school, Pier 9, the FBI operation, the trial, Marissa's confession in prison. The months of fear and fighting, and finally, justice. Yes, Emma, that adventure is over. The bad lady can't hurt anyone anymore. Good. Can our next adventure be Disney World? Ted laughed. We can definitely make that happen. After Emma fell asleep, Ted sat in his office, looking at the files from the Marissa Donaldson case. He'd kept copies of everything. Documentation of how close he'd come to losing everything, how fragile safety really was. But he'd also learned something valuable. He'd learned that being smart wasn't enough. You needed courage, allies, and the stubbornness to keep fighting even when the odds looked impossible. He learned that justice sometimes required patience, that the long game could defeat even the most sophisticated predator. And he'd learned that being a father meant being willing to face monsters to keep your child safe. His phone buzzed. A text from Virgil. Turn on the news. You're going to want to see this. Ted pulled up the live stream. The headline read, Federal Task Force announces arrest of fifth member of Murder-for-Profit Network. Laurel Hayes, the Illinois operator O'Connor had mentioned, was being walked in handcuffs into a federal courthouse. The newscaster explained that Hayes had been under investigation for 18 months, suspected of murdering 7 wealthy husbands over 2 decades. This arrest represents the culmination of a multi-state investigation that began with the prosecution of Marissa Donaldson, the U.S. attorney said at a press conference. We've now dismantled an entire network of individuals who used marriage as a weapon and murder as a business strategy. This could not have happened without the courage of witnesses, the dedication of law enforcement, and the persistence of analysts who wouldn't let suspicious patterns go unanswered. Ted knew the U.S. attorney was partly talking about him. His initial investigation into Marissa, his refusal to let the case go even after the Hunt family settled, his willingness to walk into danger at Pier 9, it had all mattered. He'd helped stop not just one killer, but an entire conspiracy of killers. Ted closed his laptop and walked to Emma's room, watching her sleep peacefully. Catherine's photograph sat on the bedside table. She'd never meet their daughter as a grown woman, never see the person Emma would become. But Ted would. He'd survived Marissa Donaldson's trap, and he'd make damn sure Emma had every opportunity Catherine had been denied. The next morning, Ted received a package. Inside was a letter from Elias Fleming and a photograph. Elias standing on a Montana mountainside, the landscape vast and beautiful behind him. Ted, found my peace. Still working on the happiness part, but the peace came easier than I expected. Out here, away from the noise and the violence and the memories, I can finally breathe. Cheryl would approve. She always said that after you face monsters, you need to remember what beauty looks like. Thanks for being part of that fight. Thanks for being someone who wouldn't quit, even when quitting was the smart option. The world needs more of that. Your friend, Elias. Ted pinned the photograph to his office corkboard, next to Emma's drawings and Catherine's picture. Reminders of what he was fighting for, what he protected, what mattered. 2 months later, Ted testified before a Senate subcommittee investigating patterns of domestic murder and systemic failures in investigation. His expertise in financial forensics, combined with his direct experience with Marissa's network, made him a valuable witness. He explained how sophisticated killers operated, how they exploited gaps in interstate cooperation, how they used financial complexity to hide crimes. Senators listened intently, taking notes, asking questions. Mr. Padilla, one senator asked, what would you say was the key to stopping Marissa Donaldson and her network? Ted thought carefully. Persistence. And refusing to accept convenient explanations when the patterns suggested something darker. Wealthy people die every day. Heart attacks, strokes, accidents. Most of those deaths are legitimate. But when you see the same pattern repeating, younger spouse, recent changes, isolated victim, convenient timing, you have to dig deeper. You have to be willing to see the uncomfortable truth. And if you could give advice to other analysts, investigators, family members who might encounter similar situations, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. Don't let sophistication or elegance or social status blind you to patterns. And most importantly, work together. I couldn't have stopped Marissa alone. I needed my brother, the FBI, Cheryl Charles, Elias Fleming, all of us working toward the same goal. Evil thrives in isolation. Justice requires community. The testimony was covered by major news networks. Ted received calls from attorneys, investigators, even other analysts who'd encountered suspicious patterns they'd been afraid to pursue. He shared what he'd learned, helped where he could, became an informal consultant on cases involving complex financial manipulation and potential violence. He never charged for this work. It was his way of honoring Cheryl's sacrifice, of ensuring other victims had the justice that had almost eluded Marissa's. 1 year after his Senate testimony, Emma turned 9. They celebrated with a party in their backyard, friends, family, balloons, and a princess-themed cake Emma had insisted on designing herself. Virgil's kids ran wild with Emma's friends. Johnny Preston manned the grill with military precision. Everyone was laughing, happy, safe. Ted watched from his porch, beer in hand, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. The nightmares about Marissa had faded. Emma was thriving. His work had meaning beyond just paying bills. Catherine would have loved this, he thought. This life we built, this family we're protecting. Uncle Ted, one of Virgil's kids called. Emma says you caught a really bad person. Is that true? Before Ted could answer, Emma appeared, grinning. My daddy catches bad people all the time. He's a hero. Ted pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. I'm just a dad who loves his daughter very much. You can be both, Emma said seriously. Like in my books, heroes are just regular people who don't give up. Later that night, after guests had left and Emma was asleep, Ted sat in his office reading emails. One caught his attention from the Bureau of Prisons. Mr. Padilla, this letter is to inform you that inmate Marissa Donaldson, register number 47,832 to 112, has requested to add you to her permanent visitor list. Per federal regulations, this requires your consent. Additionally, Ms. Donaldson has drafted a letter she wishes to send you, pending your approval to receive correspondence. Please respond within 30 days with your decision. Ted stared at the email for a long time. His first instinct was immediate refusal. He had no desire for ongoing contact with Marissa, but curiosity gnawed at him. What could she possibly want after all this time? He replied, I will accept the letter. I do not consent to being added to the visitor list. 3 weeks later, the letter arrived. Ted opened it alone in his office, unsure what to expect. Ted, I know you have no reason to read this, and even less reason to believe anything I write. But I wanted you to know what happened after you left. I've been in prison for 2 years now. In that time, I've participated in every available program: therapy, education, reflection groups. I'm not seeking sympathy or claiming redemption. I simply wanted to understand how I became what I became. The truth is ugly. I was abused as a child, developed patterns of manipulation as survival mechanisms, and somewhere along the way, those mechanisms became my identity. I saw people as resources, relationships as transactions, violence as a tool. I justified it all with elaborate rationalizations about justice and empowerment. It was all lies. I murdered 5 people for money and control. I destroyed families. I threatened your daughter, a child, to maintain my secrets. There is no rationalization adequate to excuse that. Therapy has taught me that acknowledgement isn't the same as absolution. I can acknowledge what I did without being forgiven for it. And I don't expect forgiveness. I expect to die in this cell, and I've accepted that. But I wanted you to know that Emma saved my life in a strange way. Not literally. You and the FBI did that by stopping me before I killed again. But spiritually, the night I threatened her, the casual way I discussed hurting a child, I saw myself clearly for the first time. I saw the monster I'd become. That image haunts me every day, but it also motivates me. I become a mentor here for women who've committed violence. I help them understand the patterns that led to their crimes. It's not redemption, I'm beyond that, but it's purpose. If you choose never to respond to this letter, I understand. You owe me nothing. But if any part of you can find a shred of humanity in a monster's reflection, know that your daughter's existence, her innocence, her vulnerability, reminded me what I'd lost when I chose this path. I hope she grows up strong, smart, and protected. She deserves the life I try to steal. Marissa. Ted read the letter 3 times, searching for manipulation, for angles. He found only what seemed like genuine remorse, though he knew better than to fully trust Marissa's words. He filed the letter away without responding. Marissa didn't deserve his engagement, his energy, his thoughts. She deserved her cell and her conscience and nothing more. But he kept the letter as a reminder of how close evil had come to his family and how fragile protection really was. 5 years after Marissa's arrest, Ted stood in a university auditorium delivering a lecture on financial forensics and pattern recognition. Emma, now 12, sat in the front row with Virgil, proud of her father's expertise. The key to uncovering complex fraud, Ted explained to the students, is understanding that criminals believe they're smarter than everyone else. They create elaborate schemes, layer upon layer of complexity, thinking that sophistication equals invisibility. But complexity creates patterns, and patterns can be analyzed. You just have to be willing to look. After the lecture, a young woman approached, a journalism student working on a series about the Marissa Donaldson case and the murder-for-profit network. Mr. Padilla, would you be willing to be interviewed? Your role in the investigation has never been fully told. Ted glanced at Emma, who was talking animatedly with Virgil. My role was doing my job and protecting my family. That's the whole story. But you were threatened, manipulated, used as bait. And I survived, and so did everyone I love. That's all that matters. The journalist persisted. Don't you think people need to understand how sophisticated these criminals are? How they operate? How to protect themselves? Ted considered. You're right, but I don't need to be the story. Talk to the FBI agents who built the case. Talk to the prosecutors who convicted them. Talk to the victims' families who lost people they loved. They're the important voices. What about Marissa? She's agreed to an interview if you'll participate. Wants to apologize publicly for what she did to you. Marissa can apologize to her other victims. I've got nothing to say to her. As Ted walked away with Emma and Virgil, the journalist called after him. Mr. Padilla, just one question. Do you consider yourself a hero? Ted stopped, turned back. I'm a father who did what any parent would do. I protected my kid. That's not heroism. That's just love. Emma grabbed his hand. You're my hero, Daddy. Ted squeezed her hand back. And you're mine, sweetheart. They walked out of the auditorium together into the Philadelphia evening. The city lights spread before them. Millions of lives, thousands of stories, countless battles being fought in silence and shadow. But Ted's battle was over. Marissa Donaldson was in prison. Her network was dismantled. Emma was safe, growing, thriving. And that was all that mattered. That was everything. In FCI Hazleton, Marissa Donaldson sat in her cell reading Ted's polite but firm refusal to participate in the journalist's interview. She'd expected as much. Ted was too smart to give her any platform, any attention, any validation. She'd never see him again, never speak to him again, never threaten his daughter or manipulate his life. And somewhere in the crushing weight of that isolation, Marissa Donaldson finally understood what she'd truly lost. Not her freedom, not her wealth, not her victims, but her humanity. And unlike her physical freedom, that was something no sentence could ever return. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Mask Falls. Troy Sinclair had built his life on two fundamental principles. Loyalty was everything, and betrayal was unforgivable. As he lay motionless in the hospital bed, his breathing steady and eyes closed, he listened to his wife of 12 years destroy everything he thought he knew about his family. We'll build a better life without your useless father, Holly whispered to their two children, Mason and Chloe, ages 10 and 8. Her voice carried a venom Troy had never heard before. He's been holding us back for years. Once he's gone, we can finally be happy. The words cut deeper than the surgeon's scalpel that had removed the tumor from his brain just 18 hours earlier. Troy's recovery had been faster than expected, his consciousness returning while the medical staff believed he remained in a post-surgical coma. The irony wasn't lost on him. The man they thought was brain damaged was hearing every calculated word of their betrayal. But what if Daddy wakes up? Chloe's small voice trembled with confusion. He won't, sweetheart, Holly replied with cold certainty. And even if he did, he'd never be the same. Derek explained it to me. The surgery, it changes people, makes them different. Broken. Derek. Troy's blood pressure monitor would have screamed if he'd allowed his rage to surface. Derek Hoffman, his business partner, his best friend since college. The man who'd been best man at his wedding. The man who'd apparently been planning his downfall while sharing dinners at his table. Troy had spent 15 years building Apex Security Solutions from nothing into a multi-million-dollar private military company. What his family didn't know, what nobody except a select few knew, was that Troy Sinclair wasn't his real name. Before Apex, before Holly, before the suburban life in Denver, he'd been Troy Kellerman, a covert operative for a government agency that officially didn't exist. His retirement had been part of an elaborate cover, his marriage and family initially intended as deep cover that had evolved into something he thought was real. The conversation continued as Holly outlined their escape plan. Derek had already moved money from the business accounts. They'd leave tonight while Troy was unconscious, drive to Derek's cabin in Montana, then disappear entirely. The life insurance would eventually pay out, especially with Derek's testimony about Troy's deteriorating mental state following the surgery. Mason, help your sister pack only the essentials, Holly instructed. We can't take much, but Derek says we won't need anything from our old life. Troy heard his 10-year-old son, the boy he'd taught to ride a bike, to throw a fastball, to stand up to bullies, respond with enthusiasm that shattered what remained of his heart. Cool. This is like the spy movies you and Derek watch. Are we really going to disappear forever? Forever and always, baby. No more worrying about your father's mood swings or his boring security work. Derek's going to teach you real skills, hunting, fishing, survival stuff. As their footsteps faded down the hospital corridor, Troy opened his eyes for the first time since his surgery. The private room was dimly lit, machines humming softly around him. But his mind was crystal clear, sharper than it had been in years. The tumor that had been causing his headaches and occasional memory lapses was gone, and with it, any illusion about the people he'd trusted most. Nurse Patricia Kowalski entered for her evening rounds, a seasoned woman in her 50s who'd worked intensive care for 20 years. She checked his monitors, made notes on her chart, then paused when she noticed his eyes were open. "Mr. Sinclair, can you hear me?" Troy studied her face, noting the slight recognition in her eyes. Something told him she knew more than she was letting on. "How long?" he asked, his voice hoarse but clear. Patricia glanced toward the door, then leaned closer. "Your surgery was yesterday. Your family, they left about an hour ago. Packed bags." She hesitated, then added quietly, "I know who you really are, Troy. My brother was Daniel Kowalski, Danny Kaye from the Sarajevo operation." Danny Kaye. Troy remembered him, a communications specialist who died saving their entire team when an extraction went sideways. Patricia's resemblance to her brother was subtle but unmistakable once she'd pointed out. "Danny saved my life," Troy said simply. "He talked about you before that last mission. Said if anything happened to him, Troy Kellerman was the only man in the world he'd trust to watch over his family." She pulled out her phone, showing him a news alert. This went live 20 minutes ago. The headline read, "Apex Security CO Troy Sinclair awakens from surgery. Makes full recovery." Below was a photo of Troy from last year's security conference. "I took the liberty of contacting Channel 7, Patricia explained. Told them the tumor removal was successful and you were awake and coherent. They're calling it a miracle recovery." She smiled grimly. "I figured if people were planning to disappear, they should know you're not as helpless as they think." Troy's phone, which sat on the bedside table, began buzzing incessantly. 63 missed calls and counting, all from Holly's number. He could imagine her panic. Their carefully planned escape had just become infinitely more complicated. "Patricia," Troy said, sitting up with surprising ease, "I need you to do something for me. Tell the doctors I'm insisting on being discharged tonight. Medical advice be damned. That's not advisable. You just had brain surgery. I've had worse." Troy's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to life or death decisions. "And I have some family matters to attend to." As Patricia reluctantly agreed to speak with the attending physician, Troy stared out the window at the Denver skyline. Somewhere out there, 3 people who'd shared his name and his table were learning that their victim wasn't nearly as helpless as they'd assumed. They'd made one critical error in their planning. They'd forgotten that before Troy Sinclair, the businessman, existed, Troy Kellerman, the operative, had survived situations that would break ordinary men. And Troy Kellerman never forgave betrayal. The hunt was about to begin. Chapter 2. The Wolf Remembers. The discharge process took 4 hours of arguing with doctors, signing liability waivers, and convincing medical staff that Troy's insistence on leaving was born of sound mind rather than post-surgical confusion. By midnight, he was walking out of Denver General with a clean bill of health and a prescription for pain medication he had no intention of taking. His first stop was the Apex security offices in downtown Denver. The building was dark except for emergency lighting, but Troy had access codes that Derek didn't know existed. He made his way to the executive floor, past the awards and commendations that decorated the walls. Photographs of him and Derek receiving contract from Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and private entities that needed protection services. In his private office, Troy accessed a hidden safe behind a false panel. Inside were items from his previous life, encrypted phones, identity documents, and most importantly, contact information for people who'd moved mountains when Troy Kellerman asked them to. He powered up a secure satellite phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in 5 years. "Mongoose," came the gravelly voice on the other end. "It's Phantom," Troy replied, using his old call sign. "I need a favor." A long pause. "Jesus, Troy. Heard you went soft. Wife, kids, the whole suburban nightmare." "Nightmare's accurate. I need full surveillance on 3 targets, immediate deployment. And I need the Morrison cabin in Montana monitored." "Morrison cabin? That's the off-grid place near Glacier National Park?" "That's the one. How fast can you have eyes on it?" "Give me 6 hours." "What's the situation?" Troy outlined the betrayal in clinical terms, keeping emotion out of his voice. Mongoose, real name Carl Rodriguez, had been Troy's intelligence coordinator for 7 years of Black Ops. He now ran a private intelligence firm that operated in legal gray areas. "Damn, brother. Your own family." "Former family," Troy corrected. "I need to know everything about Derek Hoffman's activities for the past 6 months. Financial records, communications, travel patterns. Everything. Consider done. What's your timeline?" They think they have a head start, but they're not dealing with Troy Sinclair anymore. "They're dealing with me." After ending the call, Troy spent the next hour accessing Apex's financial records. Derek had been cleverly skimming money for months, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd used corporate accounts that Troy had access to through back doors Derek didn't know existed. The theft totaled nearly $2 million, moved through a series of shell companies that ultimately led back to Derek's personal accounts. But Troy wasn't interested in financial recovery. Money could be replaced. Trust, once broken, was permanent. His secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Mongoose. "Eyes on cabin. 3 vehicles present. Heat signatures show 4 adults, 2 children. Your targets are there. 4 adults." That meant Derek wasn't alone. He'd brought backup. Troy's smile was cold as he typed back. "Maintain surveillance. Do not engage. I'm coming." The drive from Denver to northern Montana took 12 hours, but Troy made it in 9. The Ducati motorcycle he'd retrieved from a storage unit outside the city was built for speed, and the highways were empty in the pre-dawn hours. As he rode, he made additional phone calls to contacts across the country. People who owed him favors, people who feared him, people who understood that Troy Kellerman always collected his debts. By the time he reached the surveillance position Mongoose had established, the sun was setting behind the Rocky Mountains. Carl Rodriguez met him at a concealed observation post overlooking the cabin valley. "Good to see you, Phantom," Mongoose said, handing Troy a pair of high-powered binoculars. "Though you look like hell. Brain surgery will do that." Troy focused the binoculars on the cabin below. "What's the situation?" "Derek Hoffman, your wife Holly, and your 2 kids. Plus 2 additional males, Marcus Webb and Antonio Rivera. Both have records. Webb for armed robbery, Rivera for assault and drug trafficking. Looks like Derek recruited some muscle for protection." Troy studied the men through the binoculars. Webb and Rivera were posted as sentries, carrying hunting rifles and communicating via handheld radios. This wasn't a simple escape plan. It was a fortress mentality. Derek's more paranoid than I gave him credit for, Troy observed. He knows I'm not the suburban businessman he's been manipulating. There's more, Mongoose continued. I intercepted communications between Derek and a contact in Mexico. He's planning to move the family across the border tomorrow night. New identities, permanent relocation. Troy lowered the binoculars. His children, Mason and Chloe, were inside that cabin, probably scared and confused, being told lies about their father by people who'd stolen them from their home. The rage that had been building since he'd overheard Holly's whispered betrayal crystallized into something cold and calculating. I need 3 things, Troy said. First, I need the local sheriff's department to receive an anonymous tip about suspicious activity at this cabin. Drug trafficking, armed individuals, child endangerment. But not for 12 hours. Giving yourself time to work? Exactly. Second, I need Derek's communication equipment jammed starting at midnight. Total blackout. Done. What's the third thing? Troy's smile was predatory. I need you to disappear for the next 6 hours. Whatever happens in that valley, you never saw me here. Mongoose studied his old partner's face. Troy, those are your kids down there. Mason and Chloe are innocent. They'll be protected. Troy's voice was granite. But Holly made her choice when she decided to steal my children and disappear with my business partner. And Derek made his choice when he recruited armed criminals to help him. What about the muscle? Marcus Webb and Antonio Rivera signed their own death warrants when they agreed to help kidnap children. Troy began checking the equipment he'd retrieved from his motorcycle. Some sins don't deserve forgiveness. As Mongoose packed up the surveillance equipment, Troy prepared for the descent into the valley. He'd given his family every opportunity to build a real life together. He'd retired from the shadow world, created a legitimate business, tried to be the husband and father they deserved. But they'd seen his kindness as weakness, his love as something to exploit. Tonight, they'd learned the difference between Troy Sinclair, the businessman, and Troy Kellerman, the operative. Some lessons could only be taught in blood. Chapter 3. The Devil's Gambit. The cabin sat in a natural depression surrounded by dense pine forest, accessible only by a single dirt road that wound through the mountains. Troy spent 2 hours studying the terrain, identifying approach routes and escape paths. Derek had chosen the location well, isolated, defensible, with clear sight lines in all directions. But he'd made the location choice thinking like a businessman, not like someone who'd spent years infiltrating enemy strongholds. At 11:45 p.m., Troy began his approach. He moved through the forest like a shadow, his black tactical gear blending with the darkness between the trees. The moon was a thin crescent, providing just enough light for his night vision equipment without exposing his position. Marcus Webb was stationed at the front perimeter, smoking a cigarette and checking his phone. Antonio Rivera patrolled the rear approach, following a predictable pattern that spoke to his lack of professional training. Both men were armed but careless. They expected trouble to announce itself with sirens and flashing lights, not emerge from the darkness like a specter. Troy reached Rivera first. The man was 20 yards from the cabin's rear entrance, rifle slung casually over his shoulder as he paused to light a cigarette. Troy moved with practiced silence, closing the distance in seconds. Rivera never heard him coming. The chokehold was precise and efficient. Rivera had time for one startled gasp before unconsciousness claimed him. Troy lowered the body silently, relieved the man of his weapon and radio, then secured him with zip ties. Rivera would wake up in several hours with a headache and no memory of how he'd ended up bound in the forest. Webb proved equally unprofessional. When Rivera failed to check in over the radio, Webb simply assumed equipment failure rather than investigating. Troy found him still at his post, now playing a game on his phone with his back turned to the forest. Marcus Webb, Troy said quietly, materializing from the shadows. Webb spun around, fumbling for his rifle, but found himself staring down the barrel of Troy's sidearm. You have a choice, Troy continued in the same conversational tone. You can walk away from this situation with your life, or you can continue working for Derek Hoffman and discover what happens to people who threaten my children. Webb's eyes were wide with panic. Look, man, I don't know what this is about. Derek just hired us for security. Said his business partner might cause trouble. Derek lied to you. This isn't about business. Troy stepped closer, and Webb could see the cold certainty in his eyes. He kidnapped my children and stole my wife. You're helping him do it. I didn't know about kids. Derek said it was a custody dispute, that you were dangerous. I am dangerous, Troy confirmed. Extremely dangerous. But not to children, and not to people who walk away when they realize they're on the wrong side. Webb dropped his rifle and raised his hands. I'm gone, man. I never saw you. Smart choice. Start walking toward the road. Don't look back. Don't contact Derek. Don't stop until you reach civilization. Troy's voice carried absolute authority. If I see you again, the conversation will be much shorter. Webb stumbled toward the dirt road, disappearing into the darkness. Troy watched him go, then moved toward the cabin. Through the windows, he could see warm light and movement. His family gathered around Derek like he was their savior instead of their captor. He circled the building, noting the layout and planning his entry. The cabin had 3 bedrooms, a main living area, and a kitchen. Derek was in the living room with Holly, their heads close together as they studied what looked like travel documents. Mason and Chloe were in one of the bedrooms, apparently asleep. Troy's secure phone vibrated with a message from Mongoose. Sheriff Department received anonymous tip. Response team dispatched. ETA 40 minutes. Perfect timing. Troy needed 30 minutes to have the conversations that would determine how this situation ended. He approached the cabin's front door and knocked. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the mountain silence. Webb. Derek's voice called from inside. Rivera? Everything okay out there? Troy knocked again, same pattern. Footsteps approached the door. Derek's shadow appeared in the window as he peered outside, then moved away. Ollie, something's wrong. Webb and Rivera aren't answering their radios, and now someone's at the door. Maybe they went into town, Holly suggested, but her voice carried tension. Derek was smarter than his hired muscle. He approached the door with his weapon drawn, using the peephole to scan the front porch. Finding it empty, he hesitated. Troy had positioned himself against the wall beside the door, invisible from the peephole's view. I know you're out there, Derek called through the door. Identify yourself. Hello, partner, Troy replied calmly. I think we need to talk. The silence that followed was deafening. Troy could hear Holly's sharp intake of breath, then rapid footsteps as she presumably ran to check on the children. Troy, Derek's voice was tight with disbelief. You're supposed to be in the hospital. Miraculous recovery. The doctors are calling it a medical breakthrough. Troy's tone remained conversational. I saw the news report myself. Channel 7 was very thorough. More silence, then whispered conversation inside. Troy could imagine Derek's panic as he realized their carefully planned escape had been built on false assumptions. The children are safe, Troy continued. This conversation is between adults. Open the door, Derek. Let's finish what you started. I'm armed, Derek warned. So am I. But I'm not here to shoot you through a door like a coward. Troy paused, letting that sink in. Although if you prefer, I can wait for the sheriff's department. They'll be here in about 30 minutes, responding to reports of armed individuals and possible child endangerment. The door opened slowly. Derek stood in the entrance, pistol in hand, but not directly aimed at Troy. His face was pale, eyes darting between Troy and the forest beyond. Where are Webb and Rivera? Rivera is taking a nap in the woods. Webb decided this wasn't his fight and left. Troy stepped into the doorway, forcing Derek to back into the cabin. Smart man. Unlike some people, he recognized a losing position when he saw one. Holly appeared from the bedroom hallway, her face a mask of fury and fear. You were supposed to be brain damaged, incapacitated. Sorry to disappoint you. Troy's eyes moved between his wife and his former business partner. Though I have to admit, discovering your little conspiracy was quite educational. 12 years of marriage, and I never knew you were such a talented actress. You were suffocating us, Holly snapped. Your paranoia, your control, your boring life. Derek showed me what we could have together. What you could have with $2 million of my money, Troy corrected. Let's not romanticize theft and betrayal. Derek's gun hand was shaking slightly. Look, Troy, we can work this out. The money can be returned. We'll call it a misunderstanding. Troy laughed, a sound devoid of humor. A misunderstanding? You stole my children, Derek. You convinced my wife to abandon our marriage, and you recruited armed criminals to help you disappear with everything I built. His voice grew colder. There's no misunderstanding here. This is betrayal, plain and simple. The kids don't have to be part of this, Holly said desperately. They're asleep. We can settle this quietly. You made them part of this when you whispered poison in their ears beside my hospital bed, Troy replied. When you told them their father was useless and they'd be better off without him. Holly's face crumpled with the realization that Troy had heard everything. But you're right about one thing, Troy continued. The children don't need to see what happens next. So here's what's going to occur. You're going to wake Mason and Chloe and tell them there's been a change of plans. You're going to explain that Daddy recovered faster than expected and wants to take them home. And then what? Derek asked. Troy's smile was arctic. Then you and I are going to have a much longer conversation about the consequences of betrayal. Without witnesses. Outside, the distant sound of sirens began to echo through the mountain valleys. The sheriff's department was ahead of schedule. Time's running out, Troy observed. Make your choice, Holly. Wake the children and send them to me, or explain to law enforcement why you're holding them in a cabin with armed criminals while their father recovers from brain surgery. Holly looked between Troy and Derek, her face reflecting the collapse of all her carefully laid plans. Derek, she whispered, what do we do? Derek's response would determine whether the next few minutes ended in surrender or violence. And Troy was prepared for either outcome. Chapter 4. Blood and Reckoning. The sirens were less than 5 minutes away when Holly finally moved toward the bedroom where Mason and Chloe slept. Her hand shook as she reached for the door handle, then stopped. No, she said, turning back to face Troy. I won't let you manipulate them. They're better off without you. Derek raised his pistol, pointing it directly at Troy's chest. She's right. You're the problem, Troy. You always have been. Controlling, paranoid, living in the past. We're giving those kids a future you never could. Troy studied both of them with the detached analysis he'd once applied to enemy combatants. So this is your choice? You'd rather face kidnapping charges than admit you made a mistake. The only mistake was not doing this sooner, Holly spat. You're a dinosaur, Troy. Your military background, your precious security business, it's all just glorified violence. Mason and Chloe deserve better. You're absolutely right, Troy said calmly. They do deserve better. Better than a mother who abandons her family for money and a stepfather who steals from his best friend. The bedroom door opened, and Mason appeared, rubbing his eyes. Mom? What's happening? Why are there sirens? Holly moved quickly to intercept him, but Troy's voice carried across the room with paternal authority. Mason, come here, son. The 10-year-old looked confused, glancing between his parents. Dad, Mom said you were sick, that you might not wake up. I'm fine, buddy. Just had a headache that needed fixing. Troy kept his voice gentle despite the weapon pointed at him. Why don't you and Chloe come with me? We need to talk. He's lying to you, Holly said desperately. The surgery changed him, Mason. He's not the same person. Mason studied his father's face with the serious expression that had always reminded Troy of himself. You look the same to me, Dad. Derek's finger tightened on the trigger. Troy, call off the police. Tell them it was a false alarm. I can't do that, Derek. See, I never called them. Troy's smile was predatory. A concerned citizen reported suspicious activity. Armed individuals at an isolated cabin, possible drug trafficking, child endangerment. The kind of call that brings a full tactical response. The sirens were deafening now, vehicles pulling up outside the cabin. Bright lights flooded through the windows as the sheriff's department surrounded the building. Sheriff's department. Exit the building with your hands visible. Derek's panic was complete now. He swung the gun between Troy and the front door, his breathing rapid and shallow. This is your fault, he snarled at Troy. Everything's ruined because you couldn't just stay unconscious. Actually, everything's ruined because you're a thief and a kidnapper, Troy corrected. But I'm willing to make this simple for you. He stepped closer to Derek, close enough that the gun barrel was nearly touching his chest. Shoot me, Troy said quietly. Pull the trigger, Derek. In front of my son, in front of the police outside, with evidence of your financial crimes already in the hands of federal investigators. See how that works out for you. Derek's hand was shaking violently now. You're insane. No, I'm informed. While you were planning your great escape, I was making phone calls. The FBI has copies of all your financial records. The money you stole has been frozen in every account you thought was secret. Your Mexico contact? He's been arrested. There's no escape plan anymore, Derek. There's only consequences. The front door burst open as tactical officers flooded the cabin. Drop your weapons. Get on the ground. Derek turned toward the officers, his gun still in hand. It was exactly the wrong move at the wrong time. Gun, one of the officers shouted. Troy moved faster than Derek could react, slamming into his former partner and driving him to the ground. The pistol discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as they fell, then skittered across the floor. Clear, Troy shouted, rolling away from Derek with his hands visible. Weapon is clear. The tactical team swarmed the cabin, securing Derek with professional efficiency. Holly was handcuffed as well, her protests about custody rights falling on deaf ears as officers found the stolen financial documents scattered across the coffee table. Sheriff Tom Bradley, a graying veteran who'd known Troy during his civilian years in Denver, helped him to his feet. Troy Sinclair, right? Heard you had brain surgery yesterday. Feeling much better now, Troy replied, watching as Derek was led away in handcuffs. Thank you for the fast response. Anonymous tip about armed individuals and child endangerment, Bradley explained, though it looks like our tipster was well informed. Mason and Chloe emerged from the bedroom, looking scared and confused. Troy knelt to their level, his voice gentle. It's okay, kids. Everything's going to be fine now. Are Mom and Derek in trouble? Chloe asked, tears in her eyes. They made some bad choices, Troy explained. But that's not your fault, and it doesn't change how much I love you. As the sheriff's deputies processed the scene, Troy made additional phone calls to contacts who would ensure Derek and Holly face federal charges for the financial crimes in addition to the kidnapping allegations. The evidence was overwhelming, the documentation thorough. But as he watched his children being comforted by paramedics, Troy realized his revenge was far from complete. Holly and Derek would face justice through the legal system, but justice and revenge were different things entirely. Over the next several hours, as statements were taken and charges filed, Troy learned the full scope of their betrayal. Holly had been planning to leave him for 8 months, convinced by Derek that Troy's post-military life made him a liability. They'd been having an affair for over a year, using business trips as cover for their relationship. Most damaging of all, they'd been systematically poisoning his children's perception of him, telling them their father was unstable, dangerous, and holding the family back from happiness. As dawn broke over the Montana mountains, Troy sat in Sheriff Bradley's office with Mason and Chloe, waiting for social services to complete their evaluation. The children would be going home with him, but the psychological damage would take time to heal. Dad, Mason said quietly, were you really sick? In your brain? I had a tumor that was causing headaches, Troy explained honestly. The doctors removed it, and now I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Derek said you might become violent, that you had episodes. Troy felt the cold rage return, but kept his voice steady. Derek told you a lot of things that weren't true, son. He was trying to make you afraid of me, so you wouldn't want to come home. But why would he do that? It was a child's question that deserved an honest answer. Because some people think lying is easier than facing the consequences of their choices. Derek stole money from our business and convinced your mother to help him. When they decided to disappear, they needed you and Chloe to go willingly. Chloe, who'd been quiet through most of the ordeal, finally spoke up. I don't want to go with Derek anymore. He was mean when you weren't around. Troy pulled both children closer, feeling the weight of fatherhood settle around him like armor. Holly and Derek were in prison, their legal troubles just beginning. But the deeper revenge, the kind that would truly balance the scales, would take time and patience. His family had been stolen from him, his children's love poisoned against him, his trust betrayed by the people closest to him. The law would punish them for their crimes, But Troy Kellerman had learned long ago that some debts could only be paid in suffering. As they drove back toward Denver, Troy's phone buzzed with a message from Mongoose. Rivera found and arrested. Webb turned himself into authorities in Billings. Clean sweep. Troy typed back. Phase 1 complete. Phase 2 begins when they're transferred to federal custody. In the rearview mirror, he could see Mason and Chloe sleeping in the back seat, finally safe. They'd been through enough trauma. They would be protected from what came next. But Holly and Derek's ordeal was just beginning. They thought prison would be their punishment, but Troy had spent years building relationships with people who operated in the gray spaces between legal and illegal. People who understood that some betrayals demanded a more personal form of justice. The reckoning had only begun. Chapter 5. The Price of Betrayal. 6 months after the Montana incident, Holly sat in the federal courthouse in Denver, listening to the judge sentence her to 8 years in prison for conspiracy, kidnapping, and money laundering. Derek received 12 years for the same charges, plus additional counts of embezzlement and fraud. Their lawyers had negotiated the best deals possible, but the evidence was overwhelming. Troy watched from the gallery, his face impassive as the woman who'd shared his bed for 12 years was led away in shackles. Mason and Chloe weren't present. They were at school, living as normal a life as he could provide after the upheaval. They'd been in therapy for months, slowly understanding that their mother's version of events hadn't been truthful. Outside the courthouse, Derek's lawyer approached Troy with an offer. "Mr. Sinclair, my client would like to speak with you. He's hoping to make amends, perhaps work out some kind of restitution arrangement." Troy studied the lawyer with cold eyes. "Restitution? The financial damages to your company. Derek understands he can't undo what happened, but he'd like to try to make things right." "Set up the meeting," Troy replied after a moment. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m., at the Federal Detention Center." The lawyer seemed relieved. "Thank you. Derek will be grateful for the opportunity." Troy said nothing. Gratitude was the last thing Derek would feel when he learned what Troy had planned for him. The next day, Troy sat across from Derek in the detention center's visiting room. His former partner looked haggard, the stress of imprisonment already taking its toll. Dark circles under his eyes, weight loss, the nervous tics of a man realizing his life was effectively over. "Troy, thank you for coming," Derek began. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but I want you to know I regret everything. The money, Holly, the kids. I got caught up in something I should have walked away from." "Tell me about the regret," Troy said conversationally. "When did it start? When you were stealing from me? When you were sleeping with my wife? Or when you convinced my children their father was dangerous?" Derek flinched at each question. "I know you hate me. I deserve that. But I'm hoping we can find a way forward. Some kind of arrangement that helps repair the damage." "You're right," Troy agreed. "We do need an arrangement, but not the kind you're thinking." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Derek, do you remember our conversation about my military background? How I always kept the details vague?" Derek nodded uncertainly. "I wasn't just military. I was something much more specialized. I worked for people who don't officially exist, doing things that never happened, in places that aren't on any map." Troy's smile was arctic. "For 15 years, I eliminated problems that couldn't be solved through conventional means." The color drained from Derek's face. "When I retired, I thought I was done with that life. I built Apex, married Holly, had children. I tried to be a normal person." Troy paused, studying Derek's growing terror. "But you brought that other person back, Derek. You reminded me who I really am." "Troy, please. I'm going to prison. I'll lose everything. Isn't that enough?" "Prison?" Troy laughed softly. "Derek, prison is the least of your concerns. You see, I've spent the last 6 months making phone calls to old friends. People who work in federal corrections. People who have influence with certain inmate populations." Derek's breathing became rapid and shallow. "Franklin Correctional, where you're being transferred next week, has an interesting demographic," Troy continued. 40% of the inmates have children. Many of them are fathers who lost custody because of their crimes. They have very strong feelings about men who kidnap children from their families. "You can't do this," Derek whispered. "I'm not doing anything. I'm simply sharing information. Your name, your crimes, your cell assignment. What happens after that is entirely up to them. Troy stood to leave. Although, I should mention, I've also arranged for copies of your financial records to be distributed. The inmates will know exactly how much money you stole from your best friend's family. Derek lurched to his feet, desperation in his voice. Troy, I'll pay it all back. Every penny. I'll sign over everything I own. You don't own anything anymore, Troy replied calmly. Your assets were seized. Your bank account's frozen. Your life insurance policy canceled. Even if you survive your sentence, you'll be released with nothing but the clothes on your back and the knowledge that every moment of suffering was earned. As Troy walked toward the exit, Derek called after him. What about Holly? She's the mother of your children. Troy stopped but didn't turn around. Holly made her choice when she decided Mason and Chloe would be better off without their father. Now she gets to live with the consequences of that choice. The Federal Women's Correctional Facility where Holly was serving her sentence was a different kind of hell. Troy had made different arrangements for her, knowing that physical violence wasn't the appropriate punishment for her betrayal. Instead, he'd arranged for something far more psychologically devastating. Through contacts in the federal system, Troy ensured that Holly was assigned to work detail in the prison library, where she had access to newspapers and internet for educational purposes. Every day, she would see articles about successful Apex security contracts, photos of Troy receiving business awards, and most importantly, pictures of Mason and Chloe thriving in their new life. The children had indeed flourished once they were away from Holly's manipulation. Mason had joined a school baseball team and was excelling academically. Chloe had discovered a talent for art and was taking advanced placement classes. They spoke of their mother rarely, and when they did, it was with the confused sadness of children trying to understand how someone who claimed to love them could have abandoned them so completely. Troy made sure Holly saw every achievement, every milestone, every moment of happiness her children experienced without her. Each newspaper clipping, each school photo, each report card was a reminder of what she'd thrown away in pursuit of Derek's promises. But the most devastating element of Troy's revenge against Holly was simpler and more cruel than anything else. He told Mason and Chloe the truth. Not immediately, and not in a way that traumatized them further. But as they grew older and asked questions about why their mother had left, Troy answered honestly. He explained how Holly had planned to disappear with Derek, how she'd told them their father was useless, how she'd been willing to steal them away from everything they'd known. The children's reaction was exactly what Troy had expected, not anger, but disappointment. They were old enough to understand betrayal, old enough to recognize that their mother had chosen her own desires over their well-being. That disappointment would last far longer than any physical punishment. 3 years into her sentence, Holly requested a meeting with Troy. He agreed, curious to see how prison had changed her. She looked older, worn down by the reality of institutional life. Her hair was graying, her face lined with stress and regret. The children won't take my calls, she said without preamble. I've never prevented them from speaking with you, Troy replied truthfully. That's their choice. You turned them against me. No, Holly, you did that yourself when you whispered poison in their ears beside my hospital bed. I simply made sure they understood the truth about what happened. Holly's composure cracked. They're my children too. I made mistakes, but I love them. Love. Troy's voice was incredulous. You called their father useless. You told them they'd be better off without me. You were willing to steal them away from their home, their school, their friends, their entire lives. That's not love, Holly. That's selfishness. I thought Derek and I could give them a better life. With stolen money and false identities, running from the law, that was your idea of a better life. Holly had no answer for that. Here's the truth you need to understand, Troy continued. Mason and Chloe are happy. They're thriving. They have friends, hobbies, goals for the future. They don't need the woman who abandoned them to disrupt that happiness with requests for forgiveness. So that's it. I serve my sentence and lose my children forever. Troy studied her face, seeing the desperate hope for some sign of mercy, some indication that redemption was possible. You made your choice, Holly. You chose Derek over your family. You chose money over your children. You chose deception over truth. He stood to leave. Now you live with those choices. Forever. As he walked away, Holly's sobs echoed through the visiting room. But Troy felt no satisfaction, no sense of closure. Revenge, he'd learned, was a cold dish that left everyone hungry. Still, justice had been served. The people who betrayed him were suffering the consequences of their actions, and his children were safe and loved and free from the poison Holly and Derek had tried to inject into their lives. Some debts could only be paid in suffering, and the debt was far from settled. Chapter 6, The Long Game. 5 years after the Montana incident, Troy stood in the rain outside Franklin Correctional Institution, watching as an ambulance carried Derek Hoffman's body away from the prison. The official cause of death was listed as complications from injuries sustained during an altercation with other inmates. But Troy knew the real story. Derek had survived 3 years of systematic psychological and physical abuse at the hands of inmates who'd been carefully informed about his crimes against children. The violence had escalated slowly, a push here, a threat there, gradually building to more serious assaults. Derek had spent the last 18 months in protective custody, isolated and terrified, barely eating, losing weight and sanity in equal measure. The final confrontation had been inevitable. For inmates, all fathers separated from their own children had cornered Derek in the prison laundry. The beating was thorough and merciless. Derek had died alone on the concrete floor, calling for help that never came. Prison warden Samuel Torres approached Troy in the parking lot, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Sinclair, I'm sorry for your loss." Troy studied the man's face, noting the subtle recognition in his eyes. Torres knew exactly who Troy was and what Derek's death meant. "Thank you, Warden. Derek made a lot of enemies with his choices." "Prison can be dangerous for certain types of offenders," Torres agreed. "Child predators, men who commit crimes against families, they don't fare well in general population. I'm sure you did everything you could to protect him." "Of course. The resources are always limited." Torres paused, then added quietly, "The inmates responsible for this incident have been identified. They'll face additional charges." Troy nodded. The inmates would be prosecuted, but their sentences would be minimal. They'd killed a child kidnapper, which carried its own form of justice in the prison hierarchy. They'd be heroes to their fellow inmates, not pariahs. As Troy drove away from the prison, his phone buzzed with a message from Mason, now 15 years old and starting his sophomore year of high school. "Dad, saw the news about Derek. Are you okay?" Troy typed back, "I'm fine, son. Justice was served." "Good. Mom's been trying to call me again. Should I talk to her?" "That's your choice, Mason. You're old enough to decide for yourself." "I don't want to." "Is that wrong?" Troy considered his response carefully. "It's not wrong to protect yourself from people who've hurt you. Family is more than blood, son. It's about loyalty, trust, and love. Real love, not the kind that comes with conditions." The conversation ended there, but Troy felt a deep satisfaction. His children had learned to recognize betrayal and protect themselves from it. They'd grown into strong, independent young people who understood the value of loyalty and the consequences of breaking it. Holly would be released from federal prison in 2 years, but she'd return to a world that had moved on without her. Mason and Chloe had legally changed their last names to Sinclair permanently, cutting the final legal ties to their mother. They made it clear through their lawyers that they wanted no contact with her upon her release. Troy had ensured that Holly's post-prison life would be as difficult as possible. Her criminal record would prevent her from finding meaningful employment. The financial restitution requirements would ensure she remained in debt for decades. Most importantly, she'd lost the thing that mattered most to her, her children's love and respect. But Troy's revenge extended beyond just Holly and Derek. He'd spent 5 years systematically destroying everyone who'd helped them or enabled their betrayal. Marcus Webb, the hired muscle who'd walked away from the Montana cabin, had found his life slowly disintegrating. Employment opportunities disappeared due to anonymous tips about his criminal associations. Landlords refused to rent to him after receiving calls about his dangerous background. He'd been arrested 3 times on trumped-up charges that were eventually dropped, but not before costing him jobs and reputation. Webb had finally fled Denver entirely, moving to a small town in Wyoming where he worked construction and kept his head down. He learned that crossing Troy Sinclair carried consequences that extended far beyond the immediate situation. The lawyers who'd initially helped Derek hide his financial crimes had faced their own reckoning. Anonymous tips to the Colorado Bar Association about ethics violations had resulted in investigations, suspensions, and in one case, disbarment. Their practices had crumbled, their reputations destroyed, their ability to practice law permanently compromised. Even Holly's sister, who'd helped her plan the initial escape, had faced consequences. Her husband's construction company had mysteriously lost several major contracts after anonymous complaints about safety violations and poor workmanship. Their marriage had suffered under the financial strain, ultimately ending in divorce. Troy's philosophy was simple. Betrayal was a contagion that had to be thoroughly eradicated. Anyone who'd helped Holly and Derek, anyone who'd known about their plans and failed to warn him, anyone who'd enabled their actions in any way, they all paid a price. The message was clear throughout Denver's business and social circles. Troy Sinclair was not a man to be crossed. His reputation as someone who never forgot a slight and never forgave betrayal became legendary. People spoke in whispers about what had happened to Derek and the others, warning their friends and colleagues to be careful in their dealings with the Apex Security CEO. But the most profound change was in Troy himself. The suburban businessman persona he'd cultivated for 15 years was gone, replaced by something harder and more calculating. He still loved his children with fierce intensity, still provided them with every opportunity and advantage. But the naive trust that had allowed Holly and Derek to manipulate him had been burned away completely. Mason and Chloe had inherited more than their father's name. They'd learned his philosophy about loyalty and consequences. They protected each other with the same intensity Troy protected them. They understood that trust was earned through actions, not words, and that betrayal was unforgivable. As Troy pulled into the driveway of their Denver home, he saw his children through the window, doing homework at the kitchen table. They were laughing about something, comfortable and secure in the knowledge that their father would always protect them from those who might harm them. The house was peaceful, stable, free from the toxicity Holly and Derek had tried to introduce. Troy had built something pure here, something that couldn't be corrupted by people who saw kindness as weakness or love as something to exploit. His phone buzzed with another message, this one from Mongoose. Package delivered to Holly's cell, as requested. The package contained newspaper clippings from Derek's funeral, attended by no one except a court-appointed chaplain and a single guard. The articles detailed his death, the circumstances that led to it, and the complete absence of anyone willing to mourn his passing. Holly would read those articles and understand that Derek's promises of a better life had led to a lonely death in a prison cell. She'd realized that the man she'd abandoned her family for had died despised and forgotten, killed by other inmates who saw him as the lowest form of criminal. Most importantly, she'd understand that Troy's revenge was patient, thorough, and complete. Derek was dead. Their co-conspirators had been systematically destroyed, and she would be released into a world that offered her nothing but consequences for her choices. The debt was nearly paid in full. Only one final payment remained, and that would come when Holly walked out of prison to discover that the life she'd thrown away was gone forever, replaced by nothing but regret and isolation. Troy Kellerman had learned long ago that some enemies could only be defeated through total destruction. And Holly Sinclair, soon to be Holly Matthews again, since she'd lost the right to his name, was about to learn the same lesson. Chapter 7. The Final Reckoning. Holly's release from federal prison came on a gray October morning, 3 months earlier than originally scheduled due to good behavior. She stepped through the gates of the women's correctional facility carrying a single bag of possessions and wearing the same clothes she'd been arrested in 7 years earlier. They no longer fit properly. Prison had aged her in ways that went beyond simple time. Troy was waiting for her in the parking lot, leaning against his black BMW with the patience of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. "Hello, Ollie," he said as she approached, his voice carrying the same conversational tone she remembered from their marriage. Troy. Holly stopped 10 feet away, studying his face for any sign of the man she'd once thought she could manipulate. I wasn't expecting you. I thought we should talk before you disappear into whatever life you've planned for yourself. Holly glanced around the empty parking lot, noting that they were alone except for the distant figures of guards in the prison towers. The children, Mason and Chloe, are 17 and 15 now. They're at school where they belong, living their lives without worrying about disruptions from people who abandoned them. The words hit Holly like physical blows, but she tried to maintain her composure. I want to see them. They don't want to see you. Troy's response was matter-of-fact, delivered without cruelty or satisfaction. They've made that very clear to their lawyers, to the court, and to me. Multiple times. They're minors. You could arrange something if you wanted to. Could I? Troy tilted his head slightly. Should I force my children to have contact with someone who called their father useless and try to steal them away from their home? Should I expose them to the woman who chose her boyfriend over their well-being? Holly's composure began to crack. I made mistakes, but I'm their mother. No, Troy corrected gently. Sarah Williams down in cell block C was a mother. She killed the man who was molesting her daughter and got 15 years for it. Janet Rodriguez in the library was a mother. She embezzled money to pay for her son's cancer treatment. You're a woman who gave birth to 2 children and then abandoned them for money and a man who died alone in a prison cell. The mention of Derek's death hit Holly like a sledgehammer. She'd received the newspaper clippings, had seen the photos of his funeral where no one came to mourn. But hearing Troy reference it so casually drove home the finality of everything she'd lost. Derek's dead because of you, she whispered. Derek's dead because he chose to betray the man who trusted him most, steal from that man's business, and kidnap that man's children, Troy replied. Prison inmates have very specific ideas about justice for men who commit crimes against families. I didn't have to lift a finger. Holly stared at him, seeing something in his eyes that hadn't been there during their marriage. A coldness that spoke of experiences she'd never understood, capabilities she'd never recognized. Who are you? She asked. The man I married would never have. The man you married was pretending to be someone else, Troy interrupted. I retired from my real life to build something normal with you and the children. I tried to be the suburban businessman you wanted me to be. But you destroyed that illusion when you chose to see kindness as weakness and love as something to exploit. He stepped closer, and Holly instinctively backed away. Let me tell you about your new life, Holly. You have $17 in gate money, no credit, no employment history for the past 7 years, and a federal conviction for kidnapping and money laundering. Your sister won't return your calls because helping you destroyed her marriage. Your parents moved to Florida and changed their phone number. The house we shared was sold to pay legal fees and restitution. Holly's face went white as the full scope of her situation became clear. But here's the beautiful part, Troy continued. I'm not going to do anything to make your life harder than it already is. I don't need to. You're going to suffer every day for the rest of your life, knowing that you threw away everything that mattered for a fantasy that led to nothing but death and loneliness. The children will graduate high school, go to college, build careers and families of their own. They'll have wonderful lives filled with people who actually love them, not people who see them as pawns in some scheme for easy money. Troy's smile was arctic, and you'll read about it all in the newspaper. Every graduation, every achievement, every milestone you'll never be part of. Holly's legs gave out, and she sank to her knees in the prison parking lot, the full weight of her choices finally crushing her completely. Please, she whispered. I know I can't undo what I did, but please don't shut me out of their lives forever. They're all I have left. Troy knelt beside her, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Holly, do you remember what you said to them beside my hospital bed? When you thought I couldn't hear you, she nodded, tears streaming down her face. You told them they'd build a better life without their useless father. You convinced them I was damaged, dangerous, holding them back from happiness. Troy paused, letting the words sink in. Well, congratulations. They have built a better life. Without you. He stood and walked toward his car, then stopped and turned back. There's a bus station in town. The 315 Greyhound goes to Colorado Springs, where there's a women's shelter that helps ex-offenders find housing and employment. I'd suggest you be on it. What if I refuse? What if I stay and try to contact the children anyway? Troy's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes that made Holly understand she was looking at a man capable of things she'd never imagined. Then you'll discover that Derek's fate wasn't unique. Some debts can only be paid in suffering, Holly. Yours is almost settled, but not quite. Don't make me add to the balance. As Troy drove away, Holly remained on her knees in the prison parking lot, surrounded by the wreckage of every choice she'd made. The fantasy of a better life with Derek had led to his death and her total isolation. The children she'd thought she was protecting from their father's influence had chosen him completely and rejected her entirely. 7 years in prison had taught her many things, but the most important lesson was this. Some mistakes couldn't be undone, some choices couldn't be taken back, and some people never forgave betrayal. Troy Sinclair, or whoever he really was beneath the businessman facade, had proven himself to be exactly what Derek had claimed. Dangerous. But not in the way Holly had been led to believe. His danger wasn't rooted in instability or violence. It was rooted in absolute certainty about loyalty and betrayal, and the patience to ensure that consequences were thorough and permanent. At 3:15 p.m., Holly boarded the Greyhound bus to Colorado Springs, carrying her single bag and the knowledge that she would spend the rest of her life paying for the decision to betray the man who'd loved her and the children who trusted her. Behind her, in Denver, Mason and Chloe Sinclair came home from school to find their father cooking dinner and helping with homework, the same way he had every day for the past 7 years. They didn't ask about their mother's release because they didn't need to know. That part of their lives was over, buried as completely as Derek Hoffman. Troy had taught them that family was built on loyalty, trust, and unconditional love, not biology, legal documents, or blood relations. They'd learned the lesson well. The debt was finally paid in full. Chapter 8, The Ghost's Legacy. 2 years after Holly's release, Troy stood in the audience of Mason's high school graduation, watching his son deliver the valedictorian speech to a gymnasium full of proud parents and excited teenagers. The young man on the stage bore little resemblance to the confused 10-year-old who'd been caught in the middle of adult betrayals. At 19, he'd skipped a grade due to his academic excellence. Mason had grown into someone who understood the world with uncommon clarity. Success isn't measured by what you achieve, Mason said from the podium, his voice carrying the confidence Troy recognized from his own youth. It's measured by how you treat the people who trust you with their loyalty and how you respond when that trust is tested. In the row beside Troy, 17-year-old Chloe recorded her brother's speech on her phone, beaming with pride. She'd grown into a remarkable young woman, artistic, intelligent, fiercely protective of the family unit they'd rebuilt. Like Mason, she'd learned early that trust was earned through actions, not words. Neither child had mentioned their mother in years. Holly had become a cautionary tale in their minds, a reminder of how people could pretend to love you while planning to abandon you. They'd moved beyond anger or sadness about her betrayal. She simply didn't exist in their emotional universe anymore. After the ceremony, Troy found himself approached by several other parents who'd gotten to know him through school events over the years. To them, he was simply a successful businessman who'd raised 2 exceptional children as a single father after his wife left the family. The truth was more complicated, but truth was often less important than the story people needed to believe. Troy called Rebecca Martinez, whose daughter had been in classes with Chloe. I heard Mason got a full scholarship to MIT. You must be so proud. I am, Troy replied honestly, though I can't take credit for his work ethic. That's all him. Still, raising 2 kids alone after your divorce, that couldn't have been easy. Troy's smile never wavered. They made it easy. Good kids make everything else manageable. Rebecca had no idea she was talking to a man who'd systematically destroyed everyone who'd betrayed his family, who'd orchestrated the death of his former business partner, who'd ensured his ex-wife would live the rest of her life in isolation and regret. To her, Troy Sinclair was just another dedicated father navigating life after his marriage ended. The carefully constructed facade had served its purpose. Troy's reputation in Denver was that of a man who'd overcome personal tragedy to build something better for his children. Apex Security Solutions had grown into one of the most successful firms in the region, its clients drawn to Troy's reputation for absolute reliability and discretion. What they didn't know was that Troy's definition of discretion extended far beyond simple business confidentiality. He'd learned to compartmentalize his life with surgical precision, the father and businessman existing in full view of the world, while the operative who'd eliminated threats to his family remained hidden in the shadows. That evening, as they celebrated Mason's graduation at his favorite restaurant, Troy watched his children interact with the easy affection of siblings who'd survived something together. They developed their own code of loyalty, their own understanding of what family meant when stripped of its illusions. "Dad," Chloe said during dessert, "Mason and I were talking about something." "Oh," Troy raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "We want to legally change our names again," Mason explained. "Not our last name. We're keeping Sinclair, but our middle names." Troy waited, curious about where this was heading. "We want to honor Mom," Chloe continued, and Troy felt his blood pressure spike before she clarified, "Patricia Kowalski, the nurse who helped you at the hospital that night. She saved our family when she called the news station." Troy felt something tight in his chest loosen. Patricia had indeed saved them, in ways his children couldn't fully understand. Her decision to alert the media about his recovery had destroyed Holly and Derek's escape plan and forced them into the desperate situation that led to their capture. "Patricia passed away last year," Mason added softly. "Cancer. We found out through her obituary. We'd like to carry her name as a way of remembering what she did for us." "Mason Patricia Sinclair and Chloe Patricia Sinclair," Troy said, testing the sound. "I think she would have been honored." The conversation moved on to other topics: Chloe's upcoming senior year, Mason's plans for MIT, the family vacation they'd take before he left for college. Normal family discussions that had taken years to feel natural again. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Troy sat in his study looking at the only photograph he kept from his previous life. It showed his old unit during a mission briefing in a place that didn't appear on any map. Young faces, hardened by experiences that couldn't be shared with civilians, bound together by loyalty that transcended blood relations. Most of those men were dead now, killed in operations that never happened or in the violent transitions that followed their return to civilian life. But they'd understood something that most people never learned. Family wasn't about biology or legal documents. It was about choosing to stand with someone regardless of the cost. Troy had tried to teach that lesson to Holly and Derek through patience and trust. When they'd rejected it, he'd taught them through consequences that would follow them to their graves. The lesson had taken, though not in the way he'd originally hoped. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Tomorrow marks 7 years. Thank you for the lesson. H. Holly." Somehow she'd gotten access to a phone and his number, reaching out on the anniversary of her betrayal. Troy stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. She no longer existed in his world. Acknowledging her attempt at contact would only validate her hope for some form of redemption. There was no redemption for betrayal. There was only acceptance of consequences. The next morning brought news that would have seemed like coincidence to anyone who didn't know Troy's true capabilities. Holly Matthews, her maiden name resumed after losing the right to his, had been found dead in her studio apartment in Colorado Springs. The cause was listed as apparent suicide, a deliberate overdose of pain medication she'd been prescribed for chronic back problems developed during her prison years. Troy read the brief newspaper article with the same emotional detachment he'd once applied to mission reports. Holly had finally accepted that her debt could only be paid through the ultimate sacrifice. Her death was neither tragic nor satisfying. It was simply the final calculation in an equation that had been building toward this conclusion for 7 years. Mason and Chloe would never know about their mother's death. As far as they were concerned, Holly had disappeared from their lives completely when she chose Derek over their family. Learning about her suicide wouldn't provide closure or peace. It would only create unnecessary pain. Instead, they would remember Patricia Kowalski, the nurse who'd saved their family with a single phone call. They would carry her name and her memory as a reminder that sometimes strangers showed more loyalty and courage than blood relatives. That afternoon, Troy made a phone call to a contact in Colorado Springs who would ensure Holly's burial was handled with minimal fanfare. No obituary, no memorial service, no notification to surviving family members who'd already moved on with their lives. She would disappear from the world as completely as she tried to disappear from his life 7 years earlier. The symmetry was perfect, the debt finally balanced. Derek had died despised and alone in a prison cell. Holly had died isolated and forgotten in a shabby apartment. The people who'd helped them had faced their own consequences, their lives systematically dismantled by the same patience and precision they'd underestimated in Troy. Only Mason and Chloe remained, and they were thriving. They'd learned the lessons Troy had tried to teach through love and were now strong enough to teach those lessons to others. The family he'd built from the ashes of betrayal was unbreakable, forged in fire and tempered by truth. Troy Kellerman was finally at peace. The suburban businessman facade was no longer necessary. His children knew who he really was and loved him completely. The operative who'd eliminated threats with surgical precision could rest, his mission accomplished. Some debts could only be paid in blood, but others could be paid in suffering, isolation, and the slow realization that every choice carried consequences. Holly and Derek had paid their debts in full, and their deaths marked the end of a story that had begun with whispered betrayal beside a hospital bed. In the end, Troy had proven something that both he and his enemies had forgotten during the years of suburban normalcy. Love was not weakness, kindness was not vulnerability, and trust was not naive. But betraying those things? That was unforgivable. The reckoning was complete. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 5 years later, Troy stood at the edge of the MIT campus, watching Mason walk across the graduation stage to receive his doctoral degree in cybersecurity at the unprecedented age of 24. In the audience beside him, Chloe cheered loudly for her brother, her own Stanford MBA having been completed the previous year. Both children had inherited their father's intensity and focus, channeling it into achievements that amazed even Troy. The young man accepting his diploma bore the confidence of someone who understood the world's complexities without being broken by them. Mason had grown into a leader, someone who inspired loyalty through example rather than demanding it through manipulation. His doctoral thesis on quantum encryption had already been recruited by 3 government agencies and 2 Fortune 500 companies. Chloe had chosen a different path, combining her artistic talents with business acumen to build a nonprofit organization that helped children from broken families find stability and support. Her work was driven by personal experience, but her approach was clinical and effective. She'd learned from Troy that emotion without action was useless, while action without emotion was hollow. After the ceremony, the 3 of them went to dinner at a quiet restaurant near campus. The conversation was easy, filled with the comfortable dynamic of people who'd survived something together and emerged stronger. "Dad," Mason said during dessert, "Chloe and I have something to tell you." Troy raised an eyebrow, recognizing the tone that usually preceded important announcements. "We've both been recruited for something interesting," Chloe continued. "A government program that identifies individuals with specific skill sets and family backgrounds." Troy felt his blood pressure spike slightly. "What kind of program?" "The kind where they know exactly who you really were before you became Troy Sinclair," Mason said quietly. "They know about Troy Kellerman, the operations that never happened, the people who officially don't exist. They also know how you handled the situation with Mom and Derek," Chloe added. "Not the official version, but the real story. What you did to protect us, how you eliminated the threats to our family." Troy studied both of his children, seeing something in their eyes that reminded him of his old unit. The look of people who'd been offered a chance to serve something larger than themselves. "They want to recruit you," he said. It wasn't a question. "They want to recruit all of us," Mason corrected. a family unit with complementary skills. You with field experience and operational planning, me with cybersecurity and intelligence analysis, Chloe with psychological profiling and organizational management. The Sinclair Group, Chloe said with a slight smile. That's what they're calling it. A specialized team that handles situations requiring discretion. Troy leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. He'd spent years building a normal life for his children, only to discover they'd inherited more than his name. They'd inherited his calling. You understand what this means? He asked. The life you'd be choosing? The things you might have to do. We understand, Mason replied. We've watched you balance two worlds for our entire lives. We've seen what happens when loyalty is betrayed and what it costs to protect the people you love. We've also seen what happens when good people do nothing because it's easier than doing what's right, Chloe added. You taught us that some debts can only be paid through action, not good intentions. Troy thought about the years he'd spent trying to give them normal lives, only to realize that normal was overrated when it came at the cost of purpose. His children had grown up understanding that the world contained predators who preyed on the innocent, and that someone had to stand between them. What about your current lives? Mason, you have job offers from every major tech company. Chloe, your nonprofit is making real impact. The nonprofit will continue, Chloe said, but it will have better funding and resources when it's backed by people who understand the mission. And cybersecurity threats don't respect corporate boundaries, Mason added. The skills are transferable, but the impact could be much larger. Troy smiled, seeing the echoes of his younger self in their certainty. They'd found their calling the same way he had, through understanding that some people would always choose to hurt others, and that choice created an obligation for those capable of stopping them. All right, he said finally, but we do this as a family. We protect each other, we trust each other completely, and we never forget that loyalty is everything. Agreed, both children said simultaneously. That night, in his hotel room, Troy made a phone call to a number he hadn't used in over a decade. Mongoose, came the familiar voice. It's Phantom. I'm back. A long pause. Thought you were done with this life. I try to be, but apparently, this life isn't done with me. What changed? Troy looked out the window at the MIT campus where his son had just graduated, thinking about the young woman who was already changing the world through her work with broken families. My children grew up, he said simply, and they chose to follow the path I try to protect them from. Good kids, the best. They understand what loyalty means, what betrayal costs, and what it takes to protect the people who can't protect themselves. Sounds like they learned from the right teacher. Troy thought about Holly and Derek, about the 7 years it had taken to balance the scales for their betrayal. He thought about Patricia Kowalski, who'd save his family with a single phone call. He thought about the difference between people who chose themselves over others and people who chose service over safety. We start next month, Troy said. 3-person team. Family unit. The Sinclairs ride again. The Sinclairs ride for the first time, Troy corrected. Everything before this was just preparation. As he ended the call, Troy felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation for the future rather than satisfaction with the past. His children had chosen to become the people he'd always hoped they could be, not despite their experiences with betrayal and consequences, but because of them. They'd learned that the world was full of people like Holly and Derek, individuals who saw kindness as weakness and trust as something to exploit. But they'd also learned that such people could be stopped by those willing to pay the price for stopping them. The next morning, the 3 of them flew back to Denver together, discussing plans for the transition and a new life they'd build around their shared mission. As the plane lifted off from Boston, Troy looked down at the city where his son had just completed his education and realized that this was what victory actually looked like. Not the destruction of enemies, but the creation of something better from the ashes of their defeat. Mason and Chloe Patricia Sinclair would carry more than Patricia Kowalski's name into their new lives. They'd carry her example of choosing to help strangers, her willingness to take risks for people she barely knew, her understanding that sometimes the right thing to do was also the dangerous thing to do. Some debts could only be paid in suffering, but others could be paid in service. Troy had paid his debt to his children by protecting them from those who would harm them. Now his children would pay their debt to the world by protecting others who couldn't protect themselves. The circle was complete, the legacy secured. The Sinclair name would stand for loyalty, justice, and the absolute certainty that betrayal carried consequences. In the end, that was all any parent could hope for. Children who understood the difference between right and wrong, and who had the courage to act on that understanding regardless of the cost. Troy Kellerman was finally at peace. Troy Sinclair was ready for war. The family that hunted together stayed together, and they would never stop hunting. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.